In the year 2000 and something, in the beautiful city of Seoul, which, like many great metropolises, remained always illuminated, the city buzzed with constant life and movement. In Gangnam-gu, within the Yeoksamdong district, a highly connected area stood out. Both day and night, the hustle and bustle never ceased, showcasing the region's relentless energy. At the top of a building owned by the D Group, on a reserved floor, there was a very special place. There lived the person who held the #1 position in the global online gaming rankings, a player whose skill was widely recognized. In this environment, where everything revolved around the mouse, keyboard, and screen, there was a room dedicated exclusively to training professional players, a true arena of virtual competition. It was precisely in this space that the world's most skilled player was seeking his next challenge, Dex, the legendary knight. The group known as D1 entered the Valley of War, the game's scenario, determined to face the famous knight Dex, who seemed to be a legend. Roar, one of the team's members, was the first to spot Dex. At first, he believed the knight was standing still on purpose, as if to intimidate his opponents with a confident stance. Full of determination, Roar thought his team could demonstrate why they were considered the best players in the world. He advanced toward the knight, who remained motionless. However, what seemed to be a passive stance turned out to be a trap. Dex, with a swift and precise move, wielded his sword and completely disarmed the opponent, leaving everyone astonished. The rest of the team watched in disbelief as Roar was defeated. They tried to advance to help him and understand what was happening, but they quickly realized that Dex was far ahead in terms of skill. With an impeccable combo, Dex took down every member of the team, proving his skill was worthy of the first place ranking. Even the strongest members, like the Tank and the Reaper, were defeated with a single blow. This made it clear that Dex was on another level. Still, the group believed that, with a good strategy, they could win. They decided to maintain their formation, but Dex, with his relentless determination, advanced with such force that resistance became impossible. When the match ended, the world's #1 player realized he had been completely defeated. Dex now occupied the top spot in the rankings, reigning supreme over the opponents left behind. Meanwhile, the player who previously held the #1 position couldn't believe what had happened. Defeat was something he never expected to face. In another place, the player known as Dex reflected on his journey. For him, the names used in games weren't important. His goal was always to reach the top, regardless of the nickname he used. With that in mind, he deleted the character Dex, deciding it was time to move on. His next goal would be even greater, and he was ready to face it. Besides gaming, the protagonist also enjoyed savoring his fries. Looking at the container where he kept his snacks, he noticed they were gone. He deeply pondered whether he should go out to buy more, since he had already accomplished his main goal of the day, and become the #1 player in the rankings. That goal was just another task on his extensive to-do list for the day, and having completed it, he decided to send a message. The former #1 in the online gaming rankings, who once reigned supreme, wasn't happy at all to realize his position had been surpassed by another player. He felt so upset and frustrated that he began trembling and talking to himself. He believed Dex had been bold and cunning to the end to claim the top spot. He also pondered deeply about who this mysterious troll really was. Not only had Dex reached the ranking, but he also sent a message announcing his departure from the game. This was exactly what happened on the day Dex made his public announcement, that he was leaving the game, and the news quickly spread throughout the gaming community. Delivery drivers in an Arcadia truck chatted excitedly about the recent feat, and how that troll had proven to be truly magnificent in his actions. As the delivery truck headed to a specific address, the drivers inside the vehicle discussed online players and their recent activities. They talked about how, little by little, many were leaving the games and debated the reasons behind their decisions. Arcadia Online was everywhere, establishing itself as one of the corporations leading the world of electronics and entertainment technologies. Along with the Argos Corporation and Silkoff, they formed an ultra-secret collaboration among these three influential companies. These corporations were responsible not only for producing advanced computers, but also for creating the first virtual world available on the market. In this virtual world, someone could easily log in through a revolutionary machine known as the Dreamer, offering an immersive experience. The marketing of these companies aimed to reach a broad audience, asserting that there was a place full of diverse possibilities and adventures waiting for them. For those feeling tired of the mundane life they were currently leading, Arcadia Online awaited with a tempting invitation for a fresh start. And this was exactly what the delivery drivers in the truck were excitedly discussing as they made their way to the last delivery of the day. Upon arriving at the final address, they noticed that the house did not seem to match the high value of such advanced technological equipment. Although it appeared to be a simple residence in poor external condition, inside it was someone extremely anxious and excited. This person had finally received the device they had been eagerly awaiting, signaling the beginning of a new journey for them. The name at the address was Yoon Jae-young, a 20-year-old young man known for his enthusiasm for online games. At that moment, the protagonist was deleting the character Dex, as he had decided to leave traditional games behind from that day forward. He would dedicate himself entirely to Dreamer, so he entered the required password and logged in to begin his new experience in the virtual world. He would enter a new world that wasn't just a game but a fully immersive virtual reality where anything was possible. And upon seeing everything from above, he found the place absolutely stunning. At first, he felt completely enchanted and captivated by Arcadia, ready to explore all its wonders and challenges. The developers had always enjoyed hiding surprises in the games, from small jokes to astonishing tricks. The greatest of these tricks was a discovery that greatly empowered the players who managed to find it. This feat was called Hidden Pieces. Within the game, someone was relying on Alice to deliver these secret pieces. Alice was also part of the game world and had the task of passing everything on to the next generation wanderer. The Dreamer operated innovatively, connecting directly to the brain and digitizing people's senses. The player had heard of this technology before, but upon seeing it with his own eyes, he realized everything was real. In the virtual environment, he could observe how people moved and interacted. There were even vendors selling goods or bartering items. When someone offered the protagonist a piece of iron ore, he became curious but didn't know exactly what it was for. As he walked through the alleys and explored the place, he also checked his status window. The registered name was Dex, and he was still at level 1, equipped with basic items like a sword, armor, and boots. He found it interesting how everything seemed simpler than he had imagined, believing he would quickly complete his initial mission. Dex knew it was challenging to perform precise movements in Arcadia. For this reason, there were special skills to facilitate actions like dashes, dodges, and precise strikes. Certainly, there were players who demonstrated skills far superior to others. The protagonist, for example, showed great dexterity by completing his first mission with immense ease. Understanding the initial task was so simple that he quickly moved on to the next stage. Confident, he believed he would finish the new mission in no time, but upon reading the details, he lost enthusiasm. This time, the task seemed more discouraging. He had to read 100 books, which he didn't consider a worthy mission. Even so, Dex headed to Edelin's public library to begin the task. At the library, he found two girls conversing about their views and perceptions of that world. As they observed the young man from a distance, they noticed that all he had done in the past 2 days was read. The girl with violet hair questioned her pink-haired friend, stating that it was natural for him to be reading since they were in a library. However, the pink-haired girl defended a different theory, explaining that not everyone who appeared there was genuinely interested in reading. Meanwhile, the protagonist considered abandoning everything and running away, as the reading wasn't captivating enough. The girl with violet hair also believed he would quickly give up on everything. However, the librarian was surprised to see the young man approaching her, asking for the continuation of a book. Even then, she thought he must be joking, as it didn't seem possible that he had actually read the first volume. Dex explained to the librarian that the initial book contained some very interesting parts, which led him to believe there must be a continuation. He made it clear that he had read the work and mentioned that it was titled The History of Arcadia, Part 1. Upon hearing this, something special was triggered in Edelin's oldest feature, and Aline contacted the librarian. Because of this contact, the librarian handed the second volume to the young man, saying he could read it as much as he liked but couldn't take it out of the library. The fact that the second book was kept separately from the first left the protagonist intrigued. The librarian, noticing the doubt, explained that the book was special and only appeared when specifically requested. Dex observed the book for a few moments, reflecting, before deciding to place it in his hands, ready to continue his journey of discoveries. The book was filled with accounts and events, beginning with the village of Edelin, where a special circumstance had been detected. On a secret mission, the player was informed that they had been selected for an exam. It was explained that, in the past, there was a legendary adventurer who hid a treasure in the lake near the starting village of Edelin. In truth, all that remained about that treasure were speculations, as no one had ever found anything concrete. The only certainty was that the treasure was referred to as the oldest remnant of darkness. It was also said that the legendary adventurer, Ezreal, had hidden the treasure near the lake in Edelin. Since no one had ever found the remnant of darkness, the treasure eventually became just a forgotten legend. The protagonist, intrigued, noticed in the book a map showing Lake Arun, suggesting it could be the only one in the village. Determined to complete the mission and uncover the truth, the player set off south of Edelin village toward Lake Arun. Upon arriving at the location, driven by sheer curiosity, he couldn't imagine that the ancient darkness might actually be present. To his satisfaction, the status window confirmed that the final condition for the mission's activation had been fulfilled. Dex, now ranked number 1, saw that a new mission had been generated for him. The protagonist was tasked with searching for remnants of darkness, determining if the legend was true, and finding those traces. With all this, it seemed hard for the player to believe that there were B-rank missions in a newly launched game. Satisfied, he thought that even high-level attack missions should be rank C, which made everything even more exciting. However, if he really wanted to, he could attempt to find the ancient darkness at the bottom of the lake. Even walking through the forest, nothing seemed truly special, which made the environment even more mysterious and intriguing. Looking around, he wondered if something might be hidden beneath. The only way to find out was by diving to investigate. With determination, he rolled up his shirt sleeves and positioned himself at the edge of the platform, diving directly into the lake. As he hit the water, he realized that the small lake was surprisingly deep, something he hadn't expected. Just ahead, he saw what appeared to be a vast, dark tunnel, sparking even more curiosity. Meanwhile, in another part of the world, technicians were discussing events related to the main scenario that had been activated. This was happening at the Korean branch of a major gaming company. The local administrator sought to understand how a new mission had been opened in that location, especially considering this had occurred less than a week after the game's launch. They informed him that one of the players had found elements directly tied to the main scenario, triggering the new events. With this, he ordered all departments to prepare efficiently to respond in case of any emergencies. It was hard to imagine problems arising so soon, as the game had been launched only 4 days ago. Meanwhile, in the lake, the main scenario seemed to brew, an increasing darkness as the protagonist advanced further into his dive. He gained new diving skills that allowed him to go deeper, inching closer to the mission's objective. Even on solid ground, he calculated that he had already dived more than 200 meters, yet he still couldn't see the bottom. He considered the possibility of giving up but reminded himself that the game was new, and many players were pushing themselves to gain advantages. Being there, wasting time while others increased their scores, made him anxious. Additionally, there was the monthly cost of the immersion capsule, a piece of equipment costing 9,000 won per month. He hoped to cover this expense using items obtained in the game, but knew it would be nearly impossible to gather that much money at this early stage. His frustration was evident, but everything changed when a new mission appeared, and it was secret and exclusive. This mission, unlike those created for other players, seemed to be a unique and exciting opportunity. He pondered what he would do if the reward turned out to be disappointing but couldn't resist trying, knowing it was an incredible chance to advance in the game. Meanwhile, in Silicon Valley, United States, at the company's headquarters, Jenica Paul, the company's president, was at the center of the developments. At just 15 years old, with shining blonde hair, she had turned her bedroom into an improvised office. She was talking to Jack via video conference, discussing the newly activated main scenario in Korea. Jack reported that a Korean player had found a clue related to a secret class, which triggered all the recent events. The young president considered it reckless to leave such important information in a starting village, something that didn't make sense to her. Jack, in turn, explained that it hadn't been their idea, saying so with a wide grin, as if he found the situation amusing. He emphasized that it was all the work of a specific person, someone not yet clearly introduced into the storyline. However, this person was well known to both Jenica and Jack. Upon hearing this, the teenager felt a surge of indignation. She grabbed her tablet, which was on a nearby piece of furniture, and saw that the information about the player had just arrived. The player in question had the secret class, Bard of Anarchy. Despite this, Jenica noticed that he seemed devoid of skills and had very little attack power. Still, one detail caught her attention. He had a special skill, something rare and surprising. Jenica was so impacted that she stared intensely at the tablet, rolling her eyes as she reflected on the situation. A scream of anger and frustration echoed through the room as she expressed her discontent with what was happening. Meanwhile, in Arcadia, 10 days had passed since Dex began exploring the lake in search of ways to complete his mission. When he finally emerged from the water with a necklace, a key piece of his task, he felt satisfied, despite soaking everything around him. Dex admired the necklace, realizing that his diving skills had improved significantly, raising his rank and increasing his stamina. The status indicators displayed the improvements he had achieved, showing growing familiarity with aquatic attributes and notable progress in his stats. In the status window, a message also appeared stating that his mission, related to the search for traces of darkness, had been completed. However, Dex realized that the black necklace was more than just a part of his mission. It contained an additional clue, which left him intrigued. The question arose, should he wear the necklace or not, considering that the information provided seemed more like a warning than an encouragement. As he pondered, a status window appeared, asking if he wanted to wear the necklace, offering the options yes or no. Without hesitation, Dex chose yes. However, he found it strange when the status bar began repeatedly asking the same question. Even after selecting yes several times, the question continued to reappear in the status window. It kept asking if he was absolutely sure he wanted to wear the necklace, warning that this would be the last opportunity to change his mind. The situation reached a point where Dex lost patience, becoming irritated and firmly declaring that he wanted to wear the necklace. However, even with his insistence, the status screen persisted, asking again if he was sure of his decision. Suddenly, a voice began interacting with him, stating that he had already been given enough chances to think carefully before choosing to wear the necklace. The voice also warned him not to regret it, and suggested that he should fully dedicate himself to creating chaos from that moment onward, something that seemed to align with his actions. Dex looked up, trying to identify the source of the mysterious voice, and noticed a blue light shining in the sky. It was from there that the words, which spoke directly to him, were emanating, provoking a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Shortly after, the status window displayed an update. His secret class was recognized, and his title changed to Cry of Anarchy. However, this transformation came at a high cost. His level system was completely deleted, replaced by a skill called Plausibility. In addition, a new mission was added to the system, and the connection between the character and the player became permanent and irrevocable. This new mission left Dex completely alarmed, as he realized that all his points had disappeared without explanation. The imposed task was to eliminate a beginner player who had not yet changed their title. The mission had a limited time frame of only 6 days. In the vast plains west of Edelin, in the well-known beginner's hunting ground inhabited by slimes, a group of hunters had gathered. With enthusiasm, they pursued the slimes, aiming to eliminate them and accumulate valuable points to level up in their journeys. In the midst of the hunt, one of the slimes was knocked out and flung away. After being defeated, it dropped a special item. The hunter, noticing that he had acquired a rare slime bubble drop, was visibly pleased. He cheerfully commented that the item had a market value of 50 bronze coins, which made his partner share in his happiness, celebrating the achievement alongside him. What the two didn't know was that they were being watched by someone hidden behind a tree. Still, they continued their celebration, thrilled with the rare item they had obtained. The player observing them closely was Dex, the protagonist, who was reflecting on the mission he had been given. His task was to eliminate beginners before they had a chance to evolve. This doubt had been bothering him ever since. An hour earlier, the system notified him that he could not delete his character, despite multiple frustrated attempts. Dex was visibly upset, feeling like someone who had just stepped into a trap. The inability to delete the character left him in a constant state of discomfort. It all began when he was assigned to a hidden class, accompanied by several alert windows. In his frustration, he tried to delete the character immediately. The reason was simple: he had no levels. After staring at the status window for a long time, he noticed that his nickname, Dex, indicated he was part of the Cry of Anarchy. He also realized that his progression did not appear in the status window. His character, unlike others, had no leveling system. Since a player's basic system is level progression, for Dex, this meant he had no way to grow. Although at that moment it didn't seem to make a difference, he knew that as other players leveled up, the gap between them would grow infinitely, making it impossible to keep up. Dex recalled the enigmatic words of the voice, which encouraged him to do his best to ruin things. That memory made him even more uneasy. Frustrated, he thought he should have abandoned everything the moment he heard that absurd conversation. He lay on the soft green grass, looking up at the blue sky above, trying to organize his thoughts. He knew that nothing would change if he just stayed there, taking no action. He had a hidden class, the Cry of Anarchy. Although it was a frustrating situation, it was still a class with potential. Dex told himself with determination that the class would be useful somehow, even though everything seemed discouraging at the moment. Looking at the sky, it seemed as if he wanted to grasp it with his hands, a gesture of hope and stubbornness. After that, Dex spent a long time observing the system window, trying to find any useful information. That's when he noticed the word plausibility. Although it was still marked as 0, the term piqued his curiosity. He wanted to understand what it meant. The description indicated that this ability increased the influence he could exert on the world around him. It allowed him to manipulate relevant statistics to artificially alter certain rules. However, he had no idea what all of it really meant. It seemed too complicated to understand. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't decipher what it practically implied. In addition, the new mission he received left him perplexed. He could barely believe a mission like that could exist. His task was to eliminate beginners who had not yet undergone significant changes in the game. For that reason, he was hiding behind a tree, carefully observing the hunters on the battlefield. From that spot, Dex could clearly see the players' satisfaction as they celebrated the rare drop they had obtained. Still uncertain, he pondered whether he should really complete the mission or just observe and let the beginners continue their journey. After thinking for a while, he decided to try completing the mission before considering giving up. Gripping his sword firmly, he mustered his courage. He looked up at the sky, as if seeking an answer, and affirmed to himself that he couldn't ignore a mission that had already been assigned. Additionally, he reminded himself that he was also a player in the game, and should act accordingly. Determined, he began walking toward the two players he was observing. But before Dex reached them, someone else appeared, claiming he could have eliminated them with just one strike. It was a blond man with long hair, accompanied by two companions, holding a dagger in his hand. He declared himself the owner of the hunting spot and demanded to know who had given them permission to hunt there. Dex, observing from a distance, found it strange for someone to claim an area in such an open game. The girl accompanying the man was outraged to hear him assert that the beginner's hunting ground belonged to him. She made it clear that it was a public space where anyone could hunt without needing permission. The man, who was at level 12 and called himself Crazy Monkey, responded mockingly, saying he could tell from her accent that she was from Seoul. The girl's companion, still on the ground, noticed something alarming. The man's name was marked in crimson above his head. He knew what it meant. That player was a PK, someone who attacked other players. Meanwhile, Crazy Monkey continued taunting the girl, claiming he could find out where she lived just from her nickname. The three players warned the couple that it would be better to leave if they didn't want something worse to happen. The young woman, distressed, looked around, searching for help from other players, hoping someone would intervene to save them. However, no one seemed willing to intervene in the chaos, leaving her feeling even more helpless. Even so, the young man decided to confront the malicious players, questioning why they were acting so cruelly. He argued that everyone should remember it was just a game, where the goal was to have fun and earn points. Hearing this, Mad Monkey and his team burst into laughter, finding it hilarious that the young man was trying to be so serious in a game. However, the young man did not appreciate being ridiculed. Even so, Mad Monkey continued, explaining that since it was a virtual reality, it was the perfect place to do whatever they wanted. He mocked further, saying that the world always worked this way, the strong ruled, and the weak had to submit. Dex was listening to everything and, in some ways, agreed with what Mad Monkey had said. That's why he decided to remove him from the game. He started by attacking one of the opposing team members. After that, he moved on to the others, stating that he unfortunately needed to end it. With his mastery of skills, Dex managed to eliminate them all with just one strike each. Removing those players from the match wasn't difficult for him, as being eliminated was all it took to exit the game. Thus, Dex removed the 3 players from the match and noticed that his plausibility increased by 1 point for each player eliminated. Now, he had also become a PK player, with his name displayed in crimson above his head. Upon hearing the status window open, Dex noticed that his plausibility indeed grew every time he removed someone from the game. Even so, he still didn't fully understand how this ability would be useful but decided to accumulate as many points as possible. The 2 players who had previously been threatened thanked Dex for saving them. Dex was straightforward and replied that they didn't need to thank him because, in fact, he would need to eliminate them too. To reassure them, he explained it was simply part of a mission he had received. Before removing them from the game, he said with a smile that they shouldn't be sad because it was just a game. Even so, one of the eliminated players got the impression, upon looking into Dex's eyes, that everything felt frighteningly real. He even thought Dex might be insane, but he didn't have much time to reflect, as he was soon removed from the game. The other players, who had only been watching without intervening, began to realize the situation had taken an unexpected turn. Dex looked directly at them and declared that they would be next since they had just stood by doing nothing. He also warned them not to complain when they were eliminated involuntarily. That day, the hunting field was filled with screams. Soon, a rumor began circulating on Arcadia's main page. Everyone was talking about the same thing, the crazy PK player who had appeared. The protagonist continued his mission late into the night. The moon shone brightly in the sky as he persisted in his hunt. From a tall tree, an owl watched Dex, who wandered through the forest searching for beginner players to complete his task. The beginners ran desperately through the darkness of the early morning, shouting and calling for help, hoping someone would assist them. In the chaos, one of them tripped over a stone and fell. A status window immediately appeared, informing him that his movement speed had been reduced. The player, still on the ground, looked back in fear, trying to confirm if the pursuer was still nearby. To his despair, Dex remained hidden in the darkness, among the trees, closely observing his prey. Dex wasn't eliminating other players out of malice but because the game's mission forced him to. However, the beginners had no idea of the burden he carried. When he found the fallen player, Dex approached with the intent of completing the mission and eliminating him. The beginner, terrified, begged Dex to stop, arguing that he was only trying to survive and didn't deserve to be hunted down. Dex, with his sword resting on his shoulder, hesitated for a moment. He paused to listen to what the other player had to say, though he didn't have many choices given the mission he had to complete. The fallen player, with his eyes closed, lamented how the gaming industry seemed ruthless, even in a newly launched game that was supposed to be civilized. Intrigued, Dex lowered his sword slightly to listen more attentively. He responded to the player, saying he didn't understand his words, as he was simply following the rules set by the game. For the beginner, however, it was hard to believe that. The idea of being eliminated by another player seemed absurd and cruel. Even so, Dex removed him from the game, knowing he had to continue his mission and gain more plausibility within that virtual universe. After completing another elimination, Dex stopped for a moment, showing signs of fatigue. He knew the online arcade system included a kind of virtual death penalty. Any eliminated player had to wait 24 hours before being able to return. Although this measure was a strategy to combat addiction, it also aimed to increase player engagement with the game. At the customer service department of Arcade Online, the team was overwhelmed with countless complaints and access requests. The manager didn't understand the reason for the commotion, but the reports were clear. Something unusual was happening. There was talk of a PK that had emerged in the game. Players claimed that a peculiar individual was causing chaos and monopolizing events. To the support team lead, it seemed like the work of someone taking the game to extremes. They had just decided to work overtime in the customer service department because everything was extremely hectic. Meanwhile, in Arcade, Dex continued staring at his status window, still unable to reach any level. His attributes seemed normal, but his plausibility was at 1025. He noticed that for every player defeated, he earned 1 point. He thought the results were satisfying for someone who had gone 2 nights without sleep, even though it was harder than he imagined. Now, he was the target of disdain from everyone he had removed from the game, carrying a strange emotional burden. He questioned whether it was really right to eliminate all those beginners so soon after the game's launch. Even while completing the mission, he still felt there was something very peculiar about it, and there were 6 days and 23 hours left to finish it. Although he didn't agree with the mission, he knew it wasn't his decision to make. He had to comply, just like everyone else. Suddenly, something caught his attention. Looking back, he noticed several slimes. All the slimes seemed tired and sad for some reason, but one approached the protagonist. This particular slime, however, appeared happy and grateful, as it had been saved, and his favorability with the slimes increased. When he realized that all the slimes were about to jump toward him to hug him in gratitude, he felt a bit alarmed. However, the slimes were so soft and thankful that he eventually gave in to their cuteness and gladly accepted their gratitude. He thought to himself how different the slimes were from anything he had encountered so far, despite being so socially isolated. Now, he was happy because at least he had found a place where he belonged, with all the slimes smiling and joyful around him. However, he noticed torches lit in that direction and heard people talking. Since they were far away, he couldn't understand what they were saying. He had to bid farewell to the slimes, knowing that staying there could be dangerous for both himself and the slimes. The beginners who had been removed from the game and forced to spend 24 hours away had returned, determined to hunt Dex. Their leader seemed resolute in finding him. Upon noticing the protagonist running, he immediately alerted the others. He shouted to the group about what he had seen ahead and ordered them to chase the individual to teach him a lesson. Meanwhile, the protagonist kept running through the night, trying to shake off the hunters as he weaved between the trees. He saw a beam of light ahead and sped up, aiming to reach that place that might offer an escape. However, upon arriving, he realized it was a cliff and the hunters were watching his movements. The leader, holding a torch, declared that Dex was completely cornered upon seeing him at the cliff's edge. He also warned that it was their turn to remove him from the game, and that he should accept it without resistance. Dex, tired and sleepless for 2 nights, had already planned everything. So, he smiled confidently. Standing right at the edge of the cliff, he simply jumped, knowing that doing so would return him to his capsule. The other players, watching from the top of the cliff, were outraged to see him fall. They had wanted to be the ones to remove him from the game, but he had chosen to disconnect himself. They thought he was some kind of lunatic, but as he fell, Dex just gave a broad smile before logging out. The group of players found the moment so unusual that they decided to record the scene and post it on social media. The protagonist's fall generated a flood of comments, including many from outraged individuals. These comments came mainly from players who had also been removed from the game by Dex during his missions. Another player, while conducting some research, discovered that over 700 cases had been reported. These reports pointed to players who had been victims of the protagonist while he was completing missions in the slime habitat. Because of this, many believed his level wasn't very high, despite his controversial actions. In response, one player decided to gather others who had been removed from the game by the protagonist. It was agreed that everyone would meet in the main square of the arcade game to plan their next steps. The objective of the meeting was to devise a plan to eliminate the troll who had been driving away numerous beginner players. In this context, the players understood that in Arcadia, they could not only create scenarios within the game, but also strengthen their relationships as they interacted more. Additionally, their connection occurred through the internet, and their actions were represented in the game, depending on the AI's will. This artificial intelligence, called Alice, detected the large group gathered in the square and began investigating the reason behind it. Based on this event, Alice generated a new mission, which was sent to everyone present in the square. The notification indicated they should locate the PK player in the slime habitat and remove them from the game. Everyone received the mission simultaneously, preparing to act against the player who had caused so much trouble. A mission-related panel appeared at the Korean branch, leaving everyone deep in thought. The team responsible for planning and construction was caught off guard. The manager didn't know what to think about a mission appearing out of nowhere, without any prior warning. The scenario management team was also concerned about the quality of work being performed. Kang Tae-hoon, looking at his team, wanted a clear answer about what was causing so much chaos. Everyone knew it was an emergency situation, an unexpected occurrence. It was a sudden and abnormal mission, which made everyone in the department anxious, turning the environment into chaos. In fact, the mission was related to the main quest of Act 1, and when it was mentioned to the manager, he was completely shocked. The team's expectations were far removed from reality. Just 2 days after creating the main mission, another one had already been generated. Everyone was aware of the significant difference between creating a mission and its actual launch. It was like a plant seed, which doesn't sprout and bloom immediately. For a generated scenario to influence all users and become a true quest, it would typically take several months. This was what the scenario team had predicted, and the 2-day difference was enough for them to realize their predictions were wrong. The manager, with the tablet in his hands, tried to understand what could have happened, as he knew there had to be a reason behind it. He observed images of the PK player, unable to comprehend how a mission to eliminate beginners could have been created. The manager speculated that this user might be directly connected to the main scenario. The Korean branch believed the headquarters might be behind it, but even so, the idea didn't seem to make sense. Another striking point was the impressive number of players that a single player had managed to remove from the game. Meanwhile, the protagonist was at home, sleeping, trying to rest after 2 intense nights of hunting. When the first rays of sunlight began to appear in the morning, he woke up, determined to return to his computer and check what was happening in Arcadia. Everyone was talking about the player who had been eliminating beginners in the slime habitat. Even he, an experienced player, was surprised by the commotion surrounding his name. There were over 2,000 negative comments directed at him, and he thought this might become annoying. He considered whether it was time to stop, but, at the same time, didn't want to because he had many expenses to cover, including the Dreamer installation. Standing next to the capsule, he pondered what to do. He didn't know whether to continue and become even more hated or to quit. As a dedicated player, the protagonist decided to return once more to the slime habitat in Arcadia. However, he didn't imagine that the system had created a mission for other players to start hunting him. The slime habitat was now calmer, with fewer beginner players around. However, it was no longer the perfect place for Dex to hunt beginners, and he thought he should look for another location. That's when he heard a noise and turned to see what was happening. It was a sad slime, its face clearly showing its discontent. While the protagonist was focusing on the little slime, he heard the hunters who were on his trail. He realized they were chasing the slime and discussing among themselves how difficult it was to capture it. Above one of the hunters' heads, a green nickname indicated he was just a regular player. The player eventually found the slime he was looking for, near another hunter. The other hunters told the protagonist that the slime was their target. They told Dex it would be disrespectful to take advantage and capture someone else's prey. However, the protagonist observed the slime's terrified face and decided to act. He left the little slime near the edge of a cliff and approached the hunters, pulling up the hood of his cloak. Thus, he protected his face and identity. The players noticed he was approaching them. However, Dex remained silent, watching with a stern expression the hunters who had cornered the small slime. He kept walking toward them until, finally, one of the hunters flicked him on the forehead. At first, the protagonist stayed quiet, but soon he smiled and began to scream. This startled the player who had lightly touched the protagonist's forehead. The player, acting cleverly, threw himself to the ground and began thrashing around, shouting that this was the PK player. As he yelled, other players heard and became interested in capturing the mentioned player, as there was a significant reward. Now, all the players turned their greedy eyes toward the one they believed to be the PK. Everyone wanted to capture that player to claim the prize, convinced he was the notorious PK. Meanwhile, the protagonist, with his slime, hurried away to avoid being caught up in the chaos. As the other players hunted the decoy player, it gave Dex and the small slime the chance to escape. Eventually, The other players managed to corner the decoy player they believed to be the PK. Terrified, he suddenly remembered where he had seen those threatening eyes. He recalled seeing Dex's image, described as the PK player, in a video circulating online. Far from all that confusion, Dex and the small slime were now calmer, away from the commotion. With the slime in his hands, Dex was satisfied. He had managed to move forward and, most importantly, stay safe. The slime was extremely grateful for being saved just in time, and the protagonist tended to its injuries. The status window revealed that the player had rescued a slime in danger, increasing his favorability with slimes. In addition, he earned the title of Friend of Slimes. As he read the windows, the small slime rested in his arms. He now thought that for every beginner he had removed from the game, he had saved a slime. This made sense to him, and the title seemed fitting. But nothing would change just because he gained level 1 familiarity with the slimes. To progress in the game, he knew he needed something more. Another window popped up, showing he had reached the minimum plausibility threshold. He could now build a friendly relationship with the slimes and even use plausibility to assist them. Faced with these possibilities, the idea of helping the slimes filled him with satisfaction. Looking at the slime status window, he noticed they had only 50 vitality, low physical resistance, and 10 attack points. He also realized his plausibility was at 1025, which made him smile and brought new excitement to the game. And since that was what plausibility was for, he decided to use it for the slime's benefit. The status window warned that plausibility would permanently disappear once he made the change. But the player, determined to use his plausibility to help his slime friends, didn't hesitate. Using his plausibility, he boosted the damage of Anarchy, doubling its strength. In doing so, he altered the base stats of the slime species. Now, all the slimes appeared slightly less cute but had reached level 15. Monsters or creatures that users must defeat are an essential component of any RPG game. Among these monsters are the first ones new players encounter, known as beginner prey. Commonly referred to as tutorial monsters, in Arcadia Online, slimes filled this role. But if these tutorial monsters became so strong that beginner players couldn't defeat them, the outcome would be entirely unexpected, as could be seen on the official channel and various internet sites. Posts in Arcadia Online forums frequently discussed the slimes, noting how they were becoming increasingly powerful. There were also players creating game tutorials in Arcadia. These players mentioned how great the game's graphics and other features were, and, when spotting slimes from a distance, some thought they were merely cute, harmless creatures. Still, they didn't hesitate to draw their swords. Even when the slime stayed still, their intention was to capture and eliminate it. However, recent events had beginners worried. As slimes were now capable of defending themselves, they had started removing players from the game for 24 hours when attacked. The final result of the 1025 plausibility points given to the slimes, now at level 15, was a horrifying end caused by a seemingly weak monster. Arcadia had an average of 10,000 new users daily, and the total annihilation of its beginners by the slimes was underway. At first glance, the slimes seemed calm and peaceful, easy to eliminate. However, after gaining help from the player Dex and his plausibility, the slimes were now able to defend themselves. This left the hunters increasingly discouraged in their pursuits, something Dex observed from above. He reflected that these slimes were the peaceful type, only attacking after being provoked. But now, they were attacking even before being provoked. The slimes' characteristics had changed after their levels increased, and if that were the case, the protagonist thought, plausibility had the power to change the game in an absurd way. This had to be a much more complex ability than he had imagined. But he quickly noticed that the players getting into trouble with the slimes were the same ones. The same players who had tried to hunt Dex and the slimes earlier were now being cornered by the slimes themselves. The slimes had enough points and strength not only to defend themselves but also to attack the beginners. The once sweet slimes were now strong enough to attack and remove several players from the game. This worried other hunters, as the slimes could defeat them with just one strike. The protagonist realized that every strengthened slime that eliminated a player returned plausibility to Dex. This made the player more excited, finding the game a bit more interesting. 2 hours after the slimes began hunting the players, Dex's plausibility status had already surpassed 3,000. Dex was thrilled, as he had gained 4 times more plausibility in just 2 hours. Now, he was thinking differently. He shouldn't just try to finish the mission assigned to him. It would be better to strengthen the slimes as much as possible and gain as much as he could. However, he became frustrated upon realizing that the slimes couldn't be strengthened beyond level 15. Taking a deep breath, the protagonist murmured that he already knew things wouldn't be that easy. Still, the strength the slimes had should be enough, and it wouldn't make much of a difference. Raising his hands, he told the slimes he now needed their help to hunt the beginners. Meanwhile, at the Korean branch, the game manager demanded a report. The issue was that at 1:20 p.m. that day, it was confirmed that the slime's stats had been abnormally strengthened. This was all due to a massive and sudden increase in the removal of beginners from the game, and the situation was ongoing. The manager wanted to know if there was any news from headquarters, but even after checking multiple times, they received no response. Frustrated, he asked how much stronger the slimes had become. The report indicated a 10-fold increase. The manager couldn't believe the slimes were now 10 times stronger. That number was so alarming that none of them could accept it. Thinking further, the manager, just to confirm his conclusion, asked how much HP the users currently had. The response was clear: they had 100 HP. Everyone knew the slimes were much stronger now. For a level 1 beginner, a single strike from a slime would be enough to remove them from the game. The manager thought that everything happening in Arcadia couldn't be caused by a simple error. Since it was a meticulously calculated world built with the best technology, they couldn't simply ignore it. For better investigation, the manager decided to enter a dead dreamer capsule to see for himself what was happening. Once inside, his authority was confirmed. The level 3 administrator and executive director had entered Arcadia. He was there to uncover the truth, so he headed to Alice, the game's artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, Alice merely observed the man approaching. It was another sunny, blue sky day in the beginner's hunting grounds at Slime Habitat 1. Everything was calm, and the protagonist noticed there was no one around. He thought something must have happened. Looking at his status window, he saw that the time left to complete his mission was 1 day and 22 hours. The rate of player removals was slowing down. Not many beginners were going to the slime field anymore. And it wasn't just that. Level 15 adventurers had also started coming to the slime habitat to hunt them. Now it was harder for him and the slimes to defeat the intruding hunters. This meant there wasn't much more to gain there, but Dex didn't see the situation as entirely bad. Although slow, the numbers were increasing, and when the total reached 10,000 beginners he had removed from the game, he earned the title Beginner Exterminator. Mission rewards increased, and he was set to receive a level reward. He was also given an intermediate reward, something contained within a golden chest. Seeing this, he immediately accepted it, and was pleased to have received such an intermediate reward. He assumed it was money, however, only a light emerged from the box, leaving him confused. He thought something strange might be happening. The intermediate reward, he suspected, could actually be a trap. There were also flashy effects and lights. Everything was surrounded by a sphere with a dark core. He thought that the object at the center of the violet light might be the reward, but it looked like something else entirely. Increasingly, the dark sphere surrounded by violet light emitted lightning bolts. The status window confirmed that he had successfully received the intermediate reward. He had obtained a familiar. It was a figure shrouded in brilliant light. At first, it seemed enormous. The unusual being asked Dex who he was and how he had managed to summon it. Initially, Dex was satisfied, as the being's presence exuded immense pressure. He thought he had just summoned an infernal entity. Looking at the status window, he saw that he had summoned the Monarch of Chaos, the Demon King Satan. It didn't make much sense. The being was smiling, and Dex thought completing the summoning process would be difficult. The creature, which was supposed to be demonic, was reduced to a kind of cute Satan. Compared to Dex's size, the sinister figure was tiny, with wings, white hair, and a childlike appearance. However, when Satan looked at himself and noticed his fragile, childlike form, he was shocked. Only then did he notice the presence of the human standing right in front of him. The small Satan wanted to know who this player was. The protagonist, scratching his head, didn't know how to explain to the being that he hadn't summoned anyone. Instead, it had been a reward. When he said this, the being, which turned out to be an intermediate reward, explained that it was now Dex's familiar. Satan was very upset, declaring that he was not some lowly demon to become someone's familiar. The protagonist, watching the small winged, docile-looking figure throwing a tantrum on the ground, couldn't understand the drama. Observing this fragile presence in a fit, he imagined that this wasn't even a shadow of the Demon King. Meanwhile, the small being was saddened by his misfortune of being reduced to such a weakened state. He blamed the human in front of him for everything, saying that, regardless of the circumstances, he had been forced to form a contract with Dex as his familiar. It seemed they would have to spend some time together. After saying these words, the small Satan flapped his wings and perched on top of Dex's head. The small Satan told Dex that they should get along since they had come this far. The protagonist, looking up, thought that the Demon King was now literally on his head. He just didn't know whether to feel happy or not. Meanwhile, the small being noticed something. The being realized the humans seemed to have the power to alter things. Dex found this strange and asked what it was. The small Satan then explained that Dex could consume plausibility to help unlock the familiar's power. The status window warned him to be cautious, as his familiar was a malicious being, despite its childlike appearance. The small Demon King understood why he had been forced to accept a contract, believing he could now fight against the angels. Dex wanted answers, and the small being explained that the power he had stemmed from the world's inverted laws. Gradually, Dex realized the small being was referring to his plausibility. Not even the protagonist knew his plausibility was strong enough to attract the Demon King's interest. The small, wise Satan told the protagonist that if he gave up some of his power, he would be rewarded accordingly. At the moment, the player had 8,975 plausibility points, which was exactly the resource the small Satan desired. Dex knew plausibility was a very special element in this game, and asked the small Satan what he would offer in return. The small angel with black wings said he would think about it for a moment, then revealed a very powerful cape. However, to equip the cape, one needed to be level 150, have 2,500 defense, and 1,500 magic. Considering the required level and his current level, the protagonist realized it was absurd. Thus, the reward was useless to him, so he told the small Satan he wasn't interested in it. Satan interpreted this as the player finding the reward insufficient, concluding that his contractor was intelligent. In that case, he asked what Dex desired, but the protagonist had nothing in mind at that moment. It was then that he asked the little Satan if he could also strengthen monsters. When Satan asked which monsters the protagonist wanted to strengthen, he replied that it was the slimes. At that moment, the little Satan burst into laughter, overwhelmed with excitement, thinking it was a joke. He made it clear to the protagonist that there was nothing he couldn't do. He then asked how much plausibility Dex was willing to give up to strengthen the slime monsters. Smiling, the protagonist revealed that he was willing to give all his plausibility points for the slimes. Even more satisfied, the little Satan declared that their contract was formed and that he would strengthen the slimes. After saying this, he emitted a light, and from it emerged something grandiose. The Slime Queen, level 100. Meanwhile, hunters continued to pursue the slimes, with increasingly stronger hunters arriving. Because they were powerful, they considered the slimes extremely weak, seeing them as a kind of bug. They were satisfied with the amount of XP the game rewarded for hunting the slimes. These strong hunters found the area perfect for them, even though it was unsuitable for beginners. It was so good that they could already dream of a ranking if they focused on slime hunting. Suddenly, everything changed for those hunters. The ground began to tremble and crack. A booming voice resonated, saying it could feel the rage of weak beings who should surrender for some reason. The voice also sounded encouraging, and as it spoke words of support to the slimes, a purple mist appeared. All of this was part of the slimes' revenge, who would finally take retribution against all the hunters that had hunted them for so long. Now, the docile slimes were turning purple and taking on a menacing appearance. The transformation happened alongside something like an earthquake as all the slimes united. They seemed to be floating somewhere, and the hunters feared for their lives. However, the slimes simply passed by them, rising as if being drawn into something greater. One of the hunters pointed out something massive ahead. It seemed a mountain of slimes was forming. As this unfolded, status windows opened for all players in the slime territory. This left all the hunters perplexed. The slimes loved peace more than anything else. They had been mercilessly hunted without reason by humans who suddenly appeared. The window also informed that, after waiting impatiently, the slimes had reached a conclusion. As a result, numerous slimes were sacrificed to bring forth a great ruler. This resulted in the creation of the Slime Queen, a level 100 monster born from the sacrifice of other slimes. The massive being roared, lifting its head high as if declaring that all wrongs would now be avenged. The roar of the giant slime resonated for miles, and many hunters were defeated just by hearing it. The roar also caused trees to fall, and the hunters, fearing the end, ran desperately to save themselves. The Slime Queen descended from above in all her splendor, announcing that retaliation was about to begin. From above, observing all that was happening, were the player Dex and his little Satan. Now, the protagonist referred to the little being as Tam, a short version of Satan. They watched with satisfaction at what plausibility had done to strengthen the slimes. However, even they were slightly affected by the Slime Queen's roar. Without delay, the two sought a place to hide, knowing the queen was in a foul mood. Tam was pleased to see that the slimes had created their own ruler. The protagonist remarked that all of this was born from their thirst for vengeance. Little Tam explained that he had only used the thirst for revenge already dwelling within the slimes, combined with a bit of plausibility. Dex marveled at how he had managed to elevate certain species to the next level of evolution using just a bit of plausibility. No wonder he was considered the cry of anarchy. This was the full extent of the power he had granted, Tam told his master. Now, the slimes, once green and cute, were purple and menacing in appearance. They were heading toward all the hunters they encountered, accompanied by their queen. The small slimes spared no one. This was the beginning of the forgotten darkness, which was now starting to brew. The status window informed that, with the scenario change, the mission to eliminate the PK player had been deleted. A new mission, related to the wrath of the slimes, appeared and was reported on multiple screens viewed through various players' status windows. The square was filled with players who noticed that the next mission would be to protect the beginner's town from the Slime Queen. The players dismissed it as nonsense, believing the beginner's town could never be completely destroyed. But if that happened, players wondered what might occur while the queen continued to roar. Various players observed the wrath of the Slime Queen and, upon noticing her size and magnitude, feared for their lives. Meanwhile, from afar, two figures watched the protagonist and his small black-winged angel. The small malicious being told his master that everyone seemed distracted, making it easy to destroy the guardian crystal. However, the protagonist insisted he would do nothing for now, merely observing. The small malicious being believed his master would wait until the last second to crush the player's hopes. Thinking about this made the little creature delighted, as he anticipated they would have exciting days ahead. Meanwhile, with every slime that defeated a hunter, the protagonist's plausibility increased by another point. He soon found himself surrounded by countless plausibility point notifications. Seeing this, the protagonist realized the small Satan was right. He needed to choose a side and make a decision. Whether he sided with the players or the monsters, either choice would bring him success without needing to intervene. However, he wanted to determine which side would be more advantageous for his position in the game. It had reached a point where the Slime Queen was determined to end everything. She smiled with all her might, and the status window revealed her stats: 12 HP and 3500 MP. Her physical defense was 250. Her magical defense was 120, and her physical attacks reached 550. The Slime Queen's status window was being discussed in a meeting room, where everyone debated how things had escalated this far. The idea of shutting down the server immediately was even suggested, as it appeared to be experiencing an error. They couldn't find another explanation for why a level 100 monster had appeared in the beginner's village. The head of the scenario department voiced his opinion, while the design team leader agreed with his points. The scenario manager urged the executive director to urgently report the issue to headquarters. The director, saying nothing, merely reflected on the events. First, the sudden activation of the main scenario. Then, the mission where the player was hunted as a TK. And now, the slime's wrathful attack. It all seemed very confusing to him. Even so, he had formed his opinion and reminded everyone of the company's goals. He explained that Arcadia offered infinite possibilities, limitless freedom. He also confirmed that no one could have planned this, as everything was left in the player's hands. All of this had been driven by a single user, a fact established since the main scenario emerged. The head of scenarios considered it possible that the single suspected user had caused it all. The director knew that, regardless of the circumstances, if the situation was caused by a user's gameplay, there could be no interruptions. This was due to Arcadia's policy, even if they identified the culprit and could penalize them. Still, if they failed the mission, the beginner's village would be permanently destroyed. In Arcadia, it already felt like the beginning of the end. The village had started to catch fire. The battle between hunters and slimes was everywhere, with everyone seemingly struggling. Even experienced knights found it challenging to deal with the slimes. The knights were increasingly overwhelmed, outnumbered by the slimes, until a point where one cornered knight believed he had no chance left and would be captured. That was when a large purple slime appeared, ready to defeat him. However, another knight stepped in front of the older knight, choosing to defend him. The younger knight urged the experienced one to retreat and rest, preparing for another battle. The older knight, fatigued due to his age and prolonged combat against the slimes, was in a tight spot. The younger knight stood by his side, and the older knight, saved by him, expressed immense gratitude. The young knight insisted there was no need for thanks, but the older one kept expressing his appreciation. He said that, looking at the young knight, he was reminded of the just and courageous knight his grandfather had spoken of. This led the older knight to propose something to the young one. He asked if the young knight would be available later, as the warrior's legacy was recorded in his grandfather's journal, hinting at a hidden mission. The young knight received the mission to become the hero of ancient tales, and the decision lay before him in the status window. He was thrilled to have discovered a secret mission, something he had only heard of through rumors. Curious about the type of warrior mentioned, he decided to accept the mission. Barian, the old soldier, told the young knight he would wait for him, but first, the current situation needed to be resolved. The enormous slime kept approaching, and 3 days had already passed since the attack on the island of slimes. About half of the 7 days had already elapsed, and the users were overwhelmingly losing to the slimes during those 3 days. However, Korean users were not known for giving up. Higher-level users learned about the situation and joined forces to participate in the attack and resolve the issue. That was how everything took a dramatic turn. Beginners also formed a separate team and moved systematically. More important than the title given for eliminating 1,000 slimes, which was now Slime Eliminator, was the fact that by achieving this title, players gained 30% more defense against slimes. Additionally, their attack power became 40% stronger, and as users began to acquire this title, they managed to slow down the advance of the slimes. With that, the flag for slime hunting was raised, and users started to feel new hope. They were motivated to keep up the good work. However, behind all of this was Dex, who observed the situation from afar. He had yet to make a definitive decision, and had 1 day and 22 hours left to complete his mission. Tan observed that his master had already removed over 30,000 players from the game. The protagonist never imagined he would be praised by an evil being for doing bad things, but it all felt very strange. Even so, he had already reached a conclusion by looking at his plausibility, and realizing it had increased considerably. It had been difficult to achieve this since he was only deleting players one by one. The small black-winged angel asked the master what he planned to do about the situation. Tan told the protagonist that if nothing were done, the humans would likely win against the slimes. This made Dex thoughtful for a moment, but he soon smiled, saying it would all be very entertaining. He looked at his status window and selected his cloak again, the one he used when removing players from the game. His small black-winged angel, noticing that the master had suddenly stopped talking, asked why. However, Dex remained silent, merely putting on his cloak. When the little Satan saw that the protagonist's cloak was reddened, he became worried, thinking he might be injured. Dex, however, ignored the angel's concern and said that, whatever the case, the time had come to choose a side. He made it clear that from that moment on, they would side with the slimes. Meanwhile, the situation was reported, and the director of the Korean branch voiced his concerns to CEO Lee Mayan. She, in turn, listened to what the man had to say with her arms crossed, avoiding making any hasty decisions. Lee Mayan, the CEO of the Arcadia project, was a woman with strict principles. The 7 days granted for the slime attacks represented a period that could feel both long and short. This was the beginning of a place that deserved to be called a battlefield more than a beginner's village. Everyone noticed that the end was rapidly approaching. The remaining time until the end of the attack was exactly 10 minutes and 42 seconds. The hunters noticed the slimes were unusually quiet, wondering if they might have given up. Aware of the remaining time, they were anxious about the outcome, hoping it would be a victory for them. As the time dwindled, the status window displayed the countdown, showing only 10 minutes left until the end. The hunters were already celebrating in advance, believing victory was certain. However, the sky suddenly turned red. A sense of unease took hold of many, but the cloaked knight, known as Player Dex, wore a confident smile. He had calculated his plan and was ready to execute it, ordering the Slime Queen to advance. Meanwhile, the leader of the hunters, in a firm tone, urged his allies not to panic and not to retreat. Even with the sky turning red, they believed the confrontation was practically over and victory would be theirs. However, as he observed the other knights, he realized something was wrong. The Slime Queen had decided to act and was advancing. Could it be that humans, over time, had committed many acts against the slimes, eliminating them cruelly and relentlessly? The resistance of the slimes, which could no longer bear the humans' actions, had grown silently. The accumulated fury drove them to seek revenge, and their ruler took measures to lead this cause. The roar of the imposing Slime Queen spread fear among the humans, who quickly realized they were facing a powerful battle boss. As time passed, the Slime Queen became more aggressive, determined to end the brutality her people had suffered over the years. In contrast, the hunters began to fear for their lives, and some attempted to retreat. Even so, there were those who shouted to maintain formation at all costs and launch attacks with magic and arrows. But the one who served as a point of motivation for the hunters, the player, was at the mercy of the Slime Queen. She raised her hands above his head, clearly determined to defeat him. The hunters, perplexed, could not believe that someone had designed such a powerful adversary that they might not be able to overcome. Even under attacks of magical arrows and varied blows, the Slime Queen showed no signs of weakness, maintaining her imposing stance. Even under intense attacks with magical arrows and other devastating blows, the Slime Queen remained resolute and unwavering. A glimmer of hope appeared when they noticed the arrival of experienced hunters. With this, the challenge became to resist for another 5 minutes. The new directive was clear: protect the village's guardian stone and the central square at all costs. No matter how exhausted and desperate they were, the hunters raised their weapons with determination and shouted with all the strength they had left. The call was simple: to forget their own lives and protect the starting village and the guardian stone above all. The queen, noticing that the hunters were more determined to fight and that less than a minute remained until the end of the battle, intensified her efforts. With a countdown underway, every passing second seemed to further fuel her rage. On the other side, the hunters resisted with everything they had, determined to protect the village at all costs. A young hunter with long red hair charged directly at the Slime Queen, aiming to cause significant damage. He smiled, declaring it was already too late for her, believing that this would be the final blow. The hunter laughed confidently, certain he had won and defeated the Slime Queen. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the Arcadia project manager appealed for the CEO to take urgent action regarding the situation. After a long silence, she finally spoke, explaining that she would request authorization to stop the slime's attacks. The CEO emphasized, however, that it was not possible to simply erase the incident, as they were not deities in the Arcadia universe. It was necessary to devise a strategy to handle the situation, respecting the project's rules and purposes. She had already explained to the director that such an action was impossible because they did not have the power of Arcadia's gods. They merely managed the game and therefore would need to create an appropriate countermeasure instead of simply erasing the entire incident. She made it clear that this was the role they both played in the Arcadia project. Meanwhile, in the Arcadia universe, in the central square of the village, the player with long reddish hair sat near the main fountain. Although visibly tired, there was joy on his face, as he believed he had achieved victory. He imagined he had managed to prevent the village's end and that the battle had finally concluded. However, his thoughts were interrupted by a loud and distinct sound, the cracking of the guardian stone that protected the village as it shattered. He could not believe what his ears heard. He quickly received the message that he had failed to contain the slime's wrath. When he looked up, he saw a man nearby and heard him say, nonchalantly, that it had been an accident because his hand had slipped. Unexpectedly, the man admitted to breaking the village's main stone. He could not believe that another player could commit such an act. Turning against his own allies and favoring the slimes was something unbelievable. Dex, after eliminating that player, realized he did not receive any plausibility points. From this, he concluded that the man was not a beginner. However, it no longer mattered, as Dex already had sufficient plausibility. All who witnessed the scene understood what was happening and quickly tried to escape, as the village would be annihilated within seconds. The fact that the Guardian Stone had been destroyed by a player rather than a monster shocked everyone. Dex, for his part, made no effort to hide. He stood still in the center of the square, allowing everyone to see him clearly. The news that the Guardian Crystal had been destroyed quickly spread among the hunters still fighting. The most shocking discovery for everyone was that it wasn't a monster, but a user, who had destroyed the Guardian Stone. The players were outraged by the individual's actions, unable to accept the idea that someone could betray the group in such a way. Many began calling him a troll. Even in the face of collective outrage and the others' desire for revenge, the protagonist remained indifferent to others' opinions. Even knowing they wanted his downfall, the hunters raised their weapons, determined to confront him. Before doing so, however, they insisted on knowing the nickname he used. Some vowed to dedicate as much time as possible to hunting him down and defeating him in every game he participated in. The protagonist only smiled at such threats. He calmly stated that it wasn't the appropriate moment to deal with that. At that instant, the status window displayed a worrying message. The main scenario had been overtaken by a forgotten darkness. Since the players had failed the mission to contain the slime's wrath, the beginner village was destined to be permanently destroyed. Soon, the destruction truly began, as the Slime Queen exploded in an impressive blast. From the ground, a green substance began to emerge, floating among the players and spreading rapidly. These green substances seemed to gather to form new slimes, growing in both quantity and intensity. The hunters were incredulous. It was unthinkable that monsters could regenerate within the village. However, within moments, the green substance transformed, giving rise to huge and terrifying forms. The new slimes were now gigantic and purple. The status window confirmed what everyone feared. The slimes, despised on the continent of Arcadia, had finally won their battle against humans. After being relentlessly hunted and cruelly massacred, the slimes successfully drove the humans out of their territory. Now, the purple slimes roared in unison, claiming their territories as areas free of any human presence. With that, they began to thrive in what was once human territory, led by their ruler. Curiously, the Slime Queen, who had previously been colossal, took on a smaller and entirely different form from her original one. The protagonist observed her new appearance with interest, finding it quite peculiar and even more intriguing than before. The beginner village officially became slime territory. An alert window was sent to all players. The message warned that the area had become a hunting zone with a recommended level of 80 and that everyone should proceed with caution. However, the hunters didn't have time to react, as the slimes themselves began hunting them, driving them out of the territory. The protagonist reflected on the meaning of it all, observing how the situation had changed. After all, the hunters, who once pursued the slimes without remorse, were now the true prey. The news of the Guardian Crystal's destruction quickly spread, becoming a headline on internet gossip networks. Mikan, a reporter for TVG specializing in Arcadia news, highlighted that the game had gained massive popularity as the first virtual reality title. The coincidence of the events in the game sparked a series of complaints from users. especially due to the destruction of the main scenario in the beginner village. While these news pieces aired, the protagonist was at home, resting near his capsule. After a long pause, he decided to get up and follow the updates. Mikon explained that, due to the mission failure, the village was permanently deleted, something that outraged much of the community. Dex, on the other hand, followed the news on his phone. He considered the whole situation a massive mess but listened attentively, reflecting on the events. While drying his hair and reading online comments, he noticed users linking the events to the mysterious beginner eliminator. During his morning routine, while brushing his teeth, he wondered if it would be better to stay away for a while. Dex believed many of the complainers were frustrated about losing in-game advantages, but he was also certain he had only followed the system's imposed directives. He concluded that if he had indeed done something wrong, the company responsible for the game should punish or ban his account. He still remembered the mysterious voice he heard at the beginning of his journey, encouraging him to cause as much chaos as possible. Despite his reflections, Dex decided to focus on the present and prepared to head to university. Although he didn't consider the Shounen University of Engineering particularly impressive, he was eager for his new campus routine. When he arrived, he noticed that the young man sitting next to him was watching a video about Arcadia. To his surprise, the video featured images of himself, Dex, in the game. He was startled to realize that everything had been recorded, and even more so that the video had over 2 million views. Not understanding why there was so much interest, he watched the video closely until the young man beside him asked if he was interested in the content. Not knowing how to react, Dex replied that he had leaned in unintentionally because he found the video curious. The young man then introduced himself, mentioned his name, and expressed enthusiasm about meeting a new friend at the university. Dex returned the introduction and said it was a pleasure to meet him as well. The company CEO was closely following the events in Arcadia and realized that the village had indeed been destroyed. She believed that things might get complicated from that point onward due to Arcadia's unique characteristics. However, all of this generated significant interest, and she understood that all they could do was learn from the situation. She also noted she had never seen an executive director so hurried, as all of this had been caused by a certain user. Meanwhile, at the university, the protagonist turned pale as he faced someone who had possibly discovered his secret. The situation worsened when the young man placed his hands on the protagonist's shoulder and asked what was happening. With a wide smile, he said he didn't know what was going on, but the protagonist was in luck because he would explain everything. At that moment, Dex felt relieved because the young man only wanted to talk about Arcadia. Excitedly, he showed the video in which the PK was portrayed as responsible. Moreover, he claimed to know who had caused the slime attack on the starter village, revealing that this information was highly classified. Dex, analyzing Jaejeon, believed he needed to be as cautious as possible because he realized the young man was a big fan of Arcadia. The young man could never find out that he was the one responsible for the attacks on the beginners, as many associated this with the village's downfall. Despite talking a lot, the university student fell silent for a moment when he noticed his colleagues seemed uncomfortable. Everything returned to calm when the professor entered the room, asking if everyone was present. He introduced himself as Professor Kim Toon, head of the engineering department. He stated that everyone should seek the maximum amount of information about a technology known as virtual reality. The technology called Arcadia, since those who had experienced this world knew it would no longer be possible to keep up with the outside reality. After a long discussion, everyone reached a consensus. The current curriculum of the computer engineering department could not keep pace with the rapid changes in the world. Hearing this, the protagonist knew they were right. The professor, with a serious expression, said that after the extensive discussion, they had made an important decision. The course's name would be changed. From then on, the course would be called Virtual Reality Engineering. He acknowledged that this change would be confusing at first. The professor stressed that if they could not keep up with the great revolution of the world, they would end up forgotten. After this announcement, it was break time, and everyone headed to the university cafeteria. Even there, the protagonist found no peace, as the young man followed him and continued talking about the changes in the course. Jaejeon was excited about the fact that the professor had mentioned Arcadia during the orientation. They were discussing this when the young man asked why the protagonist didn't play Arcadia as well. The protagonist quickly came up with several excuses, one of them being the price of the capsule, which he thought was too high for his standards. Deep down, all he wanted was to change the subject, as he naturally didn't want to be caught. But he couldn't abruptly change the subject, so he asked the young man if he played Arcadia. Very excited, Jaejeon replied that he did. He might not seem like it, but he had a high level in the game. Jaejeon then offered to guide the protagonist whenever he decided to start playing. At that point, the protagonist already thought the young man was quite kind, despite talking too much. However, all the protagonist wanted was to return to the arcade, and that's exactly what he did. As soon as he arrived, the small black-winged angel asked why Dex had taken so long. The protagonist explained that he hadn't slept for a few days due to the slime attack. Looking at his little angel, he realized the angel must have been bored in Arcadia, all alone. Suddenly, someone made a noise and ran toward him. When he turned around, Dex saw that it was the slime queen. She was quickly approaching him, accompanied by her little slimes, and sought to embrace him. They all wanted to show affection and attention to the one who had saved the slimes from danger. All that affection also extended to Satan, the small black-winged angel, who was struggling to endure so much love. The slimes, along with their queen, showed great appreciation and affection for Dex, and the status window appeared. The window displayed that the slime queen expressed her gratitude to the player Dex. The slime race would always remember what that player did by driving out the humans and establishing the slimes' territory. All the slimes believed he was their savior, but the protagonist didn't think he was that grand. His title was changed from Friend of the Slimes to Savior of the Slimes. He even received a crown from the slimes. Upon being crowned, his plausibility increased by 2.4%. After participating in the Slime Island, Dex received several rewards. Besides the title change, multiple status categories were also increased. 2 titles were added while he played, and best of all, he would never show them to anyone. The small black-winged angel wanted to know something about his master, and was eager to leave that area quickly. All that display of affection was starting to turn the angel's stomach, and he also didn't enjoy seeing so many slimes in front of him. Although Dex liked the slimes, he was also starting to get bored since there were no missions to complete. After the two decided to say goodbye, the slime queen expressed her gratitude, and everyone bid farewell to the player, regretting his departure. Dex said his goodbyes with a broad smile, as he was now excited for his next adventures. He knew the new village, which he would surely reach quickly, would also have surprises waiting for him. Suddenly, a white-winged angel appeared, bringing a new aura to the environment. A being with white feathers and long blonde hair, still with wings and closed eyes, arrived silently. Thanks to the previous incident, the slime attack on the village was completely destroyed. The news reported that the users had managed to find another place to replace the village. The recommended location was the barony of Mikhail, situated about 10 kilometers north of the beginner village. Many people commented that the place was very good, and more people were heading there. The rumors spread so fast that they became like wildfire, and users gathered in the barony of Mikhail. Everyone was aware of that fact, making the place highly visited. Dex was also interested in the location. As soon as he arrived, he was asked his name, needing to answer the guard to gain access. The player responded that his name was Dex. The guard asked if he was also returning from the beginner village. Upon hearing the player's positive response, the guard remarked that everything that had happened was ridiculous, especially the way the slimes were emerging. Dex realized that the rumor had also spread among the NPCs, and therefore he should be doubly careful. The player then said that if the knight were to go to the slime's habitat, he wouldn't recognize them. The guard muttered that now it made sense why so many people were gathering in that barony. With all that, the guard asked the players to wait as he completed the standard procedures for Dex's entry. The protagonist noticed that his black-winged angel was acting strangely and asked what he was looking for. The small Satan commented that there was something familiar about that place, but perhaps he was just overthinking. However, he asked his master why he kept calling him that, as he was the monarch of chaos, the demon king. Dex replied that his name was too long, so he just called him Satan, and sometimes Tam. His black-winged angel was satisfied but still wanted to know what the master intended to do. Regarding that, he was referring to the power called plausibility, as Dex had gained much more after everything that happened. Dex noticed that his plausibility was at 33,551 and confessed that he hadn't thought of anything, so the points kept accumulating. The player, noticing his angel's intent, told him that he didn't plan to use his plausibility points at that moment. This left the small Satan terrified, and he claimed to his master that he couldn't use them without his help. From that moment, he began trying to bargain with Dex to see if he could increase the plausibility. Dex simply said he would inform his black-winged angel when he decided to use the power or give it to him. Deep down, the protagonist was pleased with the angel's suggestion, but he showed no interest in following that path. He had already understood that the power was very strong, and an increment of 150 levels had even been offered to him. However, he didn't think it was a good idea to rely solely on the small Satan and the system he was still getting to know. He knew he needed to be more cautious when using it, as he still didn't know much about the power. Above all, the most important thing at that moment was to do something that wasn't boring or tedious. He noticed that in the city, many blacksmiths were offering their tools and also looking for iron ore. The small blackwing being asked his master where they were going, and Dex replied that he was just taking a look around. However, he knew that something might catch his attention at any moment. but he noticed that things didn't seem great there. For that reason, he decided to pay closer attention to a conversation between two people inside a tavern. He overheard that the lord of the territory had ordered them to increase our production, which they found troubling. The man, visibly tired and discouraged, commented that they were sleeping and resting less than they needed. The other, with whom he was talking, agreed but thought that if they didn't meet the requested increase, they could be punished. When Dex heard about the lord of the territory, he became interested in their conversation. The little Satan noticed his master giving a malicious smile as he observed what was happening. He also heard his master mutter that all of this could be interesting for them. The little black-winged angel realized that his master was up to something again. The two men talking were approached by a player who claimed to have the solution to their problems. That player was Dex, who came over to their table and presented a proposal. The two were eager to listen. At that moment, a recovery mission for the miners appeared. He needed to mine 20 iron ores. However, little Satan found the mission quite boring and thought they could simply continue on their way. The master asked an angel to take a quick look around. The angel did so but didn't notice anything significant. However, he overheard people saying that equipment below level 20 was repaired for free. Others were constantly making offers and counteroffers, trying to attract more clients and iron miners. Satan noted that he only saw ordinary blacksmiths, but Dex told him that initially, things could appear that way. Then, he realized that most of them weren't NPCs but users, likely due to the high demand for blacksmiths. This was caused by the flow of users staying in the area, but many were rejecting missions to gather that ore. Like Satan, everyone thought it was just a normal, repetitive mission, but demand was increasing. However, the supply remained the same, and Dex asked Satan what would likely happen next. Satan, however, didn't know the answer. The master said he would figure it out, though he wouldn't like the outcome. To start, the most important thing was to make money first, and that place seemed like a great opportunity. They needed to meet the lady of the territory, Baroness Mikhail, who was deeply concerned at that moment. The constant rise in the price of iron ore was leaving the Baroness dissatisfied, as the increase was substantial. By then, there wouldn't be enough margin for the village blacksmiths, and she worried about the sharp decline in the quality of items. She thought things could get very bad if she didn't act and knew she had to take action as soon as possible. Meanwhile, on Mount Fian, a high mountain area at the entrance to the mine, Dex and his small familiar entered the mine. He thought there shouldn't be many people, as they were quite deep inside the mine. For that reason, they needed to start as soon as possible, and he told his black-winged angel that he was counting on him. However, Satan asked his master if everything would be okay with that maneuver inside the mine. He questioned what the master was trying to achieve by using plausibility power, something as useless as that. Dex told the angel to stop talking and start acting, doing what he had asked as soon as possible. Even unwillingly, Satan decided to obey his master and would do exactly as he commanded. A violet light appeared, and 8,000 plausibility points were consumed due to the contract with the familiar. As a result of that contract, a cave-destroying tool was obtained, making Dex's work much easier. He found the tool incredible and realized they could now significantly improve their financial situation. Back at the Mikhail barony, a novice blacksmith was selling his first item, a dagger he had crafted himself. Meanwhile, another shouted that he was repairing equipment for free, and others were selling handmade equipment ranked B or higher. Some were looking to buy 20 iron ores, as they needed them to complete the barony's mining mission. At the same time, a young man asked the lady if she wanted the ores for the miner's repeatable mission. When she replied affirmatively, he told her it wasn't worth it, as the mission didn't serve much purpose beyond making her more friendly. Instead, he suggested that it would be better to mine and sell the minerals, and she thanked him, saying she would skip the quest. The blacksmiths looked at the adventurers with disdain, for if not for their tips, many others would have completed the quest, which would certainly help the barony. They were upset because they had purchased ore and, in the end, would only be making lower quality items. The blacksmiths were discussing among themselves the newly arrived adventurers who were just starting in the art of blacksmithing. They didn't even know how to handle iron ore properly and hoped the Baroness would do something about it. They thought that if she didn't take action, the barony was already doomed. The economy of Arcadia wasn't much different from reality: production and consumption, supply and demand. There was also distribution, of course. The resources and spices produced in different areas varied. The demand for resources naturally differed based on situations and seasons. The most popular demand in the current economy was for iron ore, and everyone was desperate to find as much as possible. It was becoming increasingly difficult to obtain iron ore due to the large number of people who had chosen blacksmithing as a profession. The chronic shortage of iron ore, once a product that used to sell for 10 bronze, now cost 17. In other words, it was 1.7 times more expensive, and even if someone smelted the iron ore to make something, people could barely make a profit or, most often, would just take a loss. Users began complaining about this. A player commented that she understood the game was supposed to be realistic but didn't think it should go this far. Then, a new player approached them and asked if he could mine the iron himself. The two players laughed at the third, thinking it was too difficult to do since it took 2 hours to travel between the city and the mine. Not to mention that iron was also hard to mine, and couldn't be obtained that way. It required high-level tools. In short, it was better to let others mine the iron and focus on upgrades. The player who talked to the couple thought mining personally wasn't worthwhile because the profits were minimal. Soon, he realized that things worked differently in Arcadia. That was because there was a certain person who mined with great ease and efficiency. Dex, the protagonist, diligently performed the miner's job, always obtaining more and more minerals. He managed to mine not only iron but also other valuables, such as silver ore, and his mining level was increasing daily. Additionally, Dex also found rare minerals and could now detect them even if they were hidden. Even so, that profession was tiring, and he thought he had collected enough for the day. Dex had so far gathered 1,024 iron ores, 119 silver ores, 33 diamonds, 5 gemstones, and even a diamond organ. With so much material, he believed it would already be enough to cover the costs of using plausibility. Looking at his status window, he concluded he was on the right track. Meanwhile, Satan, after searching for a long time, found his master and asked where he had been earlier. The small black-winged angel then commented that he had reconsidered the situation and thought his master wasn't satisfied with just the drill. Satan, after thinking for a moment, found a perfect item for exchange. He showed the angel an artifact called Tears of Darkness, a high-level piece of equipment that would allow him to see everything around him. However, Dex wasn't interested in that artifact at the moment, and told Satan he didn't need any of it. Dex warned that using something so powerful would end up making him bored with the game, and that wasn't what he wanted. He added that, besides that, Satan shouldn't try to sell such an item to people because they would likely figure out who he really was. Each word from Dex felt like an arrow piercing the heart of the small black-winged angel. Changing the subject, Dex asked where Satan had been all that time. Satan simply replied that he had been around, but with a mischievous laugh, asked if the master really wanted to know. He then decided he would only tell the truth after finding what he was looking for. But before that, he asked Dex if he had mined enough. Dex smiled and replied that it seemed he had more ore than the entire barony, which made him quite satisfied. He told Satan what he was planning, to improve that quantity of ore every day and sell it all. This strategy would allow him to gain a good amount of sympathy points with the miners. Additionally, he would quickly attract the Baroness's interest, which would help him achieve his own goals. Elsewhere, the Baroness, during a meeting, was assessing the damage caused by the shortage of iron ore. It was discussed that the lords believed such problems were a consequence of the sudden arrival of adventurers in the region. Another participant in the meeting agreed, pointing out that many adventurers in Maximus were, in fact, novice blacksmiths. However, the biggest issue was the number of miners, which didn't increase proportionally to the number of blacksmiths. The Baroness reflected that with the growing diversity of adventurers, it would be impossible to force them to mine. This was because, according to Clause 128, Paragraph 1 of the continent's laws, such an action was illegal. She thought that, in this case, it would be better to sell the manufactured iron artifacts first. However, Clause 128, Paragraph 2 of the continent's laws also prohibited such action, making it inadmissible. As a result, the Baroness began to despair over the impact adventurers were causing. When she was on the verge of losing her patience, one of the guards rushed into the room, calling for her. He had found a serious issue, and the Baroness could no longer bear hearing complaints about the ores. However, when the guard opened the door and she looked outside, she was met with a massive mountain of ores. The guards announced that it wasn't just iron ore but also silver, rare stones, and gold ore. Dex was in an alley, sitting on some crates, counting the money he had earned. With gold coins in hand, he was visibly cheerful, having obtained 5 gold and 12 silver coins. If he converted that amount into one, it would be approximately 512 million. He thought he could make about 171 per person. Dex believed that if he kept working like this, he could earn much more. However, he was sure he could accomplish even more than he imagined. He felt the need to prepare better. That was when a voice interrupted his thoughts, asking if he was the one responsible for delivering all the ores to the barony. Looking up, Dex found himself face to face with the Baroness. A status window appeared, indicating that the Baroness was showing interest in the player. The affinity points with Baroness Mikhail increased, making Dex flash a broad smile. His plan was working. The ruler of the barony was finally showing interest in him. She then invited the player for a cup of tea and a chat, if possible. At that moment, a mission window appeared, offering Dex the option to accept or decline the Baroness's invitation for tea at her estate. After accepting the invitation, the protagonist found himself seated before the Baroness, who offered him a cup of tea. She asked him to try the tea, mentioning that it was made with herbs from Mount Fian. Dex, upon tasting it, confirmed it was an excellent tea, and the Baroness, pleased, revealed it was her specialty. The conversation then moved straight to the point. The Baroness asked the player how long it had taken him to gather all the ore. Without hesitation, Dex replied that it took about 3 days. Hearing this, the Baroness couldn't contain herself and slammed her hands on the table, unable to fathom how that was possible. In the next moment, she realized her outburst, composed herself, and asked if other adventurers could mine with him. Dex thought it wouldn't be possible, but the Baroness had already anticipated that answer. Still, Dex believed that if he gathered several adventurers, it could probably be helpful in some way. She took a deep breath, knowing it wouldn't be easy to gather so many adventurers. She then asked Dex if he could help. The Baroness explained that the city was already beginning to suffer from a lack of ore supplies, which was shaking the barony's economy. At that moment, a status window appeared for Dex, offering a special mission. The barony was in need of ore supplies. Dex felt relieved to see that the mission had finally appeared. He asked the Baroness if what she wanted was to encourage adventurers to improve. With the Baroness's affirmative response, he declared he could solve that problem for her, and accepted the mission. After their conversation, Dex logged out and returned to real life. Sitting in front of his computer, he began doing some research. However, he quickly realized that the Baroness's task wouldn't be easy. This type of mission was usually seen as tedious by players. As he moved the mouse and keyboard, he thought of a plan to expose some facts on the internet. He created a journal titled, "The Daily Life of a Player in Arcadia," hoping it would soon gain traction. In another setting, at the university, his classmate asked a young man if he could play Arcadia with him. But the young man was quite upset and seemed to have given up on continuing the game. His name was Choi, a 15-year-old boy. The friend asked why he had given up, and Choi replied that the game was filled with strange people. Choi explained that when he logged into Arcadia, he noticed the slimes had become stronger, and after the village disappeared, he got tense and didn't want to play anymore. His friend then encouraged him to keep going, reminding him that he had already surpassed the barony, and that his work as a merchant had grown considerably. However, Choi explained that this was the problem. There was too much work available in the game, and he ended up choosing to be a merchant. Disappointed with Choi's attitude, his friend realized he was very discouraged. That was when he asked if Choi wouldn't like to do something more fun in the game besides the usual tasks. At that moment, his friend showed him something on his phone that might interest Choi, a video made by the protagonist, Dex. The video was a kind of tutorial about how Dex managed to mine. In the video, Dex showed the inside of the mine and mentioned that the location had become very popular in recent days. He wanted to share something extraordinary about the iron ores, which caught the attention of the disheartened Choi. Fascinated, Choi kept watching the tutorial. Dex showed the amount of gold and silver coins he had earned through mining. Excited by the sight of the coins, Choi decided to watch the video to the end, eager to learn more. In the tutorial, Dex explained that it was possible to mine about 20 iron ores per hour. He emphasized that to do this, it was necessary to first upgrade the tools. With stronger tools, the speed and success rate would increase, allowing rare ores to be obtained. Dex even showed a grade A gemstone, saying he could obtain a magical or diamond crystal daily. The more Choi watched, the more fascinated he became with the world of Arcadia. To keep the tutorial from becoming boring, Dex skipped the part where he was mining and went on to show the profits he had made by selling his ores. He demonstrated how happy he was to see the blacksmiths satisfied. Dex revealed that he had earned 1 gold coin and 82 silver coins and asked what people thought about the amount. That information entered Choi's mind as if he were hypnotized, and he felt that he needed to try it for himself. Dex's Arcadia gameplay channel soon became popular on the internet, like a comet that appeared out of nowhere. That was the daily life of a miner, but the truth was that most of the things shown in the video were lies. Dex was merely demonstrating the efficiency of mining with an exclusive item that only he possessed. In reality, achieving that level of efficiency would only be possible if someone had a similar item. Of course, the protagonist left out some details in the video to create a sense of excitement. He was thrilled because the video's outcome managed to captivate several people interested in mining. Numerous users in Arcadia were influenced, and everyone gathered to buy pickaxes and other accessories. The circulating comment was that no one knew where so many miners had suddenly come from. The Baroness was extremely satisfied and grateful, finding it all impressive. She could hardly believe it. She asked the player how he had managed such a feat, and he, being modest, replied that he hadn't done much. In reality, he had merely stimulated the most basic human desire. Curious, the Baroness asked what that was. Smiling, Dex stated that it was money. People would do anything to earn it, and all adventurers were, at their core, capitalists. The explanation left the Baroness more confused than she had been initially, but laughing, she said she understood. However, the player warned the Baroness that she shouldn't feel satisfied yet, as additional measures would still be necessary. First, she would need to reduce the miners' wages and give them the right to obtain a share of the profits from the extracted ores. Only then would they maintain interest in working, and the lazy ones, who were merely pretending to work, would eventually leave. The Baroness, understanding what Dex was saying, found the description appropriate. Dex knew he needed to teach her about the efficiency of modern economic cruelty to achieve better results. Despite understanding what had been said, the Baroness still had doubts about the price of iron ores. Calmly, Dex asked her to ignore that fact, as those who truly needed them would pay whatever price was set. She could always justify that the previous price was too low and, therefore, no one thought about supplying. Dex then suggested that if anyone complained, she should say those complainers deserved the high price for not being willing to do what it took to obtain the ores. He explained that those who truly felt thirst would dig a well on their own. This was the best way he found to make everything as clear as possible to the Baroness. The Baroness was so pleased that she offered Dex the position of Minister of Finance. However, he declined. He hadn't finished his adventure, and she apologized, realizing at that moment that he was an adventurer. Dex knew the first step had been taken. Now, he needed to set the stage for his next move. It was then that the Baroness asked what she could do for him, offering anything within her reach. Dex knew this was the exact moment to execute his plan, so he handed her a letter sealed with his crest. As soon as the Baroness took the letter, she wanted to know what it was about. Dex, with a confident smile, explained that it was a business proposal and asked her to take a look. He assured her that she would definitely like it. Dex understood the limitations of how much one person could profit alone, but with his proposal, he could overcome those limitations. For that, he needed to govern others, and his words were enough to open the Baroness's eyes to this truth. He gave a wide smile, knowing he had reached exactly where he wanted. The Baroness attentively listened to his proposal. He wanted her to allocate 10% of total profits to him. In exchange, he would grant her full commercial authority over the iron ores. Many thousands of years ago, there was a great war between celestial beings and dark forces, known as the Sacred Demonic War. At that time, the heavens witnessed an epic confrontation between two powerful forces that seemed to symbolize good and evil. During this conflict, there was a decisive moment when the Monarch of Darkness, in direct combat with Archangel Michael, was struck. Unaware that Michael had brought a powerful sacred spear to the battlefield, the Vortex of Darkness was deeply wounded by it. Only upon feeling the impact of that blow did he recognize the energy of the divine weapon and was far from pleased with what had happened. Bringing such a powerful weapon as Muspelheim to the battle seemed unfair, and he demanded to know why Michael had chosen to use it. Archangel Michael, exalting sacred glory, firmly declared to the Monarch of Darkness that he would destroy him in that confrontation. This striking scene surfaced in the dreams of the small black-winged angel, who relived that moment in a disturbing nightmare. Upon opening his eyes and realizing it was just a dream, he understood that their location had brought those memories to life. Still, he was unsettled, as only unpleasant memories seemed to surface frequently in that place. While traveling hidden under his master's cloak, the small angel heard various people enthusiastically buying pickaxes. Curious, he asked his master the reason for this movement and what was happening with the miners. Patiently, the master explained that there was an old saying related to the situation, and the small angel listened attentively. The master said that in some situations, people could enter whenever they wanted, but leaving wasn't always so simple. He then explained that mining wasn't an easy task. It required carefully selecting locations and investing in proper equipment. He mentioned that a skilled miner could obtain, on average, 10 iron ores per hour, but this depended on several factors. The protagonist emphasized that the success of the process was directly tied to the quality of the equipment used in mining. He commented that without proper tools, like the cave-destroying tool, the results would be far inferior. He revealed to the small angel that although mining was a physically inefficient job, there was another way to make money with the mine. This piqued the small angel's interest, especially when the master explained that it was as simple as selling entry permits to the mine. The strategy was straightforward: charge an entry fee and allow those interested to pay later if they didn't have money immediately. Intrigued, the small angel asked what the entry fee would be and thought about the possibilities. He reflected that perhaps the miners could be convinced to pay 1 gold coin per entry, which seemed reasonable. Although skeptical, the angel considered that human naivety could be exploited to create advantageous deals. Even so, the master assured him the plan was safe and that profits would come with minimal effort. The small angel then began to see the idea as an opportunity to observe more closely the interaction between humans and his master's plan. The small angel realized that his master had a clever mind and was devoid of any remorse in deceiving his fellow beings. With this, he concluded that this was, without a doubt, the perfect master for him. There was no room for uncertainty. Dex noticed the small Satan was deep in thought and asked him why. The angel, however, suggested they go to a special place. He assured Dex he would enjoy the experience and that there would be no regrets. Curious, the master decided to follow the small black-winged angel. The destination was a hill near the mining area. Upon arrival, they found an immense sealed and closed door. The small angel then explained that this was the reason for his hesitation, as the place felt familiar to him. He revealed that he had been there before, and the memory surfaced after visiting the location Dex called a mine. There was clear satisfaction on his face, as he had finally found the place where the vultures were hiding. The small angel sarcastically referred to other celestial beings with nicknames like vultures, pigeons, or chickens. Despite the playful tone, the place seemed abandoned for a long time but was surprisingly well preserved, with no signs of rust. The angel asked his master if he could open the door, insisting that only Dex had the necessary power to do so. Dex, surprised by the statement, decided to try. Placing his hand on the door, he realized it remained immobile. Several mysterious messages appeared, indicating that the location was sealed by a special power. One of them warned that if Dex revealed the existence of that place to others, he would receive no reward. Dex began doubting his own strength, thinking he might not be able to break the seal protecting the entrance. The door was majestic, but without the ability to open it, it became useless, which left the small Satan disappointed. He noticed that his master didn't fully understand the power he possessed and hinted that, if Dex were a truly skilled master, he could control it. Watching his master, the small angel said he seemed like an uncertain apprentice, and questioned how much Dex really knew about his own strength. Dex wanted to understand the matter better, but the small angel said that the details of the name or origin of the power didn't matter. The angel stated that Dex's power exceeded even the scope of providence, enabling him to do whatever was necessary to balance the world. He explained that this power was close to the level of creation, something that transcended the boundaries of the ordinary. He suggested that Dex should already understand the extent of his abilities and simply trust himself. Dex, however, confessed that he hadn't understood anything, which left the small angel frustrated and disheartened. After more than 10 minutes inside the cave, the small angel finally managed to explain the concept of the power to his master. Dex then understood that plausibility was essential for the existence and transcendence of beings, including the small Satan. Dex began to grasp why his angel insisted so much on the importance of plausibility. Gradually, the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. Looking at the gate before him, he asked the small black-winged angel if he would really be able to open it. The small angel explained that the seal on the gate was likely placed by the chickens, as he ironically referred to other angels. With a persuasive tone, the small Satan asserted that whoever placed the seal was irrelevant to Dex. He encouraged his master to set aside doubts, and revealed what needed to be done to move forward. He said Dex had to try again, but this time with determination, truly believing he could succeed. Following the instructions, Dex placed his hand on the gate once more, with the firm thought that he would be able to open it. The small angel, malicious and cunning, urged him to focus his energy and fully believe in the success of his action. As soon as Dex followed the instructions, he noticed the seal on the gate began reacting in an unexpected way. Messages in the status window appeared, indicating that 15,000 plausibility points would be needed to break the seal. Though he considered the amount absurd, Dex decided to spend the points, imagining that if not here, he would rarely find a better use for them. Determined to open the gate, Dex confirmed the expenditure of 15,000 plausibility points, resulting in the seal's destruction. Upon opening the gate, Dex encountered something extraordinary, a hidden celestial altar that seemed to carry special significance. The small black-winged angel was visibly pleased, as he had finally found the place he had been searching for. To him, the altar was the perfect hiding spot for the attic pigeons, as he sarcastically called the angels. Gazing at the grandeur of the place, Dex noticed a gleaming golden box resting on the altar before him. The Great Sacred Demonic War was a fierce and total conflict between angels and demons, with Arcadia as its main stage. During the war, countless lives were lost, and the continent was deeply scarred by the tragedies and destruction. The situation was so disastrous that, if not for the salvation provided by the World Tree, no being in Middle-earth would have survived. 1,000 years after the war's end, many still bear the scars and fear of that event. They pray that such an event will never happen again, leaving messages as warnings for future generations. Written in the memories of a traveler, these messages remain as an eternal alert. Amidst this, an alert emerged on the status window. The stairway to the high heavens at Mount Fian had been invaded by a user. The system reported a critical error in launching a mystic-ranked quest, marking the situation as an emergency. The information detailed 693 similar cases of errors, indicating the issue was not isolated. In response, the team responsible for scenario creation and other departments convened immediately to address the problem. The scenario team manager explained that everyone was exhausted and facing recent challenges. Even so, he requested everyone's understanding, as the emergency meeting was unavoidable. The fatigue was evident, especially since only a few days had passed since the incident at the starter village. After investigating the matter, they confirmed the problem was related to hidden content at Mount Fian. The assistants present carefully analyzed the details attached on page 3 of the distributed material, searching for a solution. One of the most alarming pieces of information was that Mount Fian, the territory of angels, held little-known mysteries. The scenario director admitted he was also completely unaware of this information until the current incident. He revealed that Mount Fian was, in fact, the gateway to the high heavens, the place where the first angels had descended to Arcadia. This detail reinforced the significance and sanctity of that hidden location, adding even more complexity to the case. While analyzing, some team members became intrigued by the name of the mystic-ranked quest that had been corrupted. All they could discover was that it had a direct connection to the Second Great Sacred Demonic War. Hearing this, the director was visibly alarmed, having no idea how something so dreadful had resurfaced. Meanwhile, in Arcadia, the protagonist, after breaking the seals and opening the gate, found himself before a golden chest. Dex, however, wasn't impressed with the stairway to the high heavens. On the other hand, the small angel made a great fuss over the discovery. They had finally found the angel's hideout, a place filled with treasures. The small angel suggested to his master that he take everything he could from there. The protagonist stared intently at the golden chest before him, asking his familiar if the treasure was really inside. The small angel, confident, assured him it was and urged him to open it. Dex then extended his hand, slowly approaching the mysterious chest. A message appeared, indicating that an incomprehensible language was engraved on the chest, making it impossible to decipher. The status window suggested that someone knowledgeable in ancient languages might be able to unravel the puzzle. Thus emerged a quest titled Hidden Ruins. This surprised Dex, who decided to reflect on his next step. As he analyzed the situation, he pondered that the item certainly seemed extraordinary, and that opening it might be a good idea. However, the previous quest promised a special reward if he reported the discovery to the Baroness. The small angel, curious, asked why the master was hesitating to open the chest immediately. Dex thought that if he hadn't discovered that place, he would have continued with the previous quest and secured the promised reward. Now, with the new discovery revealed by his familiar, the previous quest was definitely out of reach. He considered that a simple noble like the Baroness was unlikely to offer a reward greater than what might be in the chest. For the protagonist, the most significant point was that he had used plausibility to open the gate and uncover this secret location. He concluded that instead of publicizing the existence of this place, it would be wiser to keep it entirely secret. He praised the small black-winged angel for mentioning the existence of the hideout and decided, finally, that he would open the golden chest. The small malicious being was pleased with his master's decision, as he hadn't expected anything different from him. However, after more than 10 minutes of continuous effort, both were exhausted from trying to open the mysterious chest. Dex lamented that his strength and status were so low, otherwise, he could have opened the chest easily. The small blackwing being reflected that if he had his original body, opening the chest would have been a matter of moments. He found the entire situation ridiculous. After overcoming so many challenges to get there, they were now defeated by a mere stone. As he commented on this, he gave his master an excellent idea. Before deciding what to do, Dex asked his angel if he was sure there was treasure inside the chest. Tired and irritated, the small being replied that he was absolutely certain and would never deceive his master. Equipping his protective goggles, the protagonist realized that his only option was to use his trusty cave destroyer. Even Satan was impressed by his master's decision to simply destroy everything. Dex explained to his familiar that usually, when a door was locked, it didn't matter the method or direction used to try to open it. In situations like that, destruction was always the right answer, he said with a wide smile on his face. He powered up the drill, and the small demonic being began thinking that humans might be worse than demons. As the minutes passed, the tool drilled through the outer layers of the box. Finally, an extraordinary reward emerged. The status window informed Dex that he had completely destroyed an ancient relic, previously unknown. Because of this, celestial beings were shocked, and his affinity with the heavens decreased. The window also advised him to avoid crossing paths with sacred beings, but he earned the title of Relic Destroyer. Dex thought everything had become easier after using the cave destroyer, but upon opening the box, he was astonished by what he found. Inside, there was a skeleton. Annoyed with his angel, he said he wasn't shameless enough to desecrate a grave. The small being apologized, explaining that he thought the master wouldn't care about such details. Dex had already opened the box but hesitated to touch anything near the skeleton. His angel insisted, saying the right answer was to take only the necklace, as that was what really mattered. It was an imposing golden necklace. The small Satan believed the object was, in fact, a sacred item. To him, the necklace could ruin the future plans of the angels, whom he enjoyed calling chickens, vultures, or pigeons. A status window message informed Dex that he had obtained the glorious celestial medallion, an item of powerful sacred energy. As soon as the protagonist picked up the necklace, an intense light spread, and bolts of lightning began emanating from the medallion. Dex felt the energy flowing through him, so powerful that it illuminated everything around him. He reacted cautiously, attentive to what would come next. Dex began to feel the intense fluid coursing through his body. The status window revealed the medallion's special ability. A secret class, Holy Prophet, had been granted to him. However, the sensation was like being crushed by immense force. Warning windows kept appearing. It was revealed that his current job did not fall into the holy category, and a fatal contradiction had occurred. The black-winged angel, visibly upset, was nearly destroyed by the light emanating from the medallion. He asked his master what was happening, but Dex, holding the medallion, admitted that he didn't know either. When he checked the celestial medallion's classification, the system indicated it was a deactivated item due to a fatal error. Dex realized the game would need to address this issue, deciding to wait and see how things unfolded. Meanwhile, nearby, a guard at the entrance of a mining cave stopped someone trying to enter. It was young Choi, who had watched the tutorials and, like others, ended up being misled. Now, a strange key blocked his entry. The guard, not recognizing the boy, asked if he was interested in mining there. He showed a piece of paper and explained that it was necessary to pay to mine, asking if Choi had the pass. Choi remembered that nothing had been mentioned about tolls or related costs in the videos he had watched at school. He considered that perhaps the situation had changed. The guard remarked that those who didn't work there wouldn't receive food. The boy asked about the price of the pass, and upon hearing the answer, he pondered whether he could afford it. The guard informed him that the pass cost 30 gold coins per month, a seemingly reasonable amount at first glance. However, Choi knew that, in practice, a miner earned only 1 gold coin per day, and each gold coin was equivalent to 100,000 won. Doing the math, he realized he would have to pay the equivalent of 1 million won per month, something impossible for a student. Desperate, he began to think he might have to abandon his dream of getting rich as a miner. Choi explained to the guard that he had come there to make money but couldn't afford the entry fee. The guard gave a broad smile upon hearing this, realizing he had found another worker willing to serve for free. He assured the boy that it was no problem, as he could work first and pay later. It was a buy now pay later system. Choi, not fully understanding the details, was instructed to seek more information at the nearby office. The boy, looking toward the adjacent office, noticed a beautiful girl inside. As soon as he saw her, his cheeks turned red, while the guard observed the scene, believing he had successfully recruited another worker. The mining field on Mount Fian, belonging to the barony of Mikhail, had been facing a shortage of workers. However, thanks to the Baroness's plan, it was now attracting excellent labor. The workers seemed enthusiastic, which made it easier to attract new miners in a short time. Dex reflected that such cunning couldn't have been the Baroness's idea alone. Someone even more devious must have helped plan it all. Surely, this wicked individual had created a system that exploited the needs of others for personal gain. Meanwhile, Dex's status window showed that he had resolved the Baroness's concern and needed to meet her to receive his reward. He grew excited upon realizing he had completed the mission and quickly informed his small black-winged angel, Satan, that he intended to wrap things up there. Curious, Satan asked his master about his plans. Dex replied that he would do whatever was necessary. The angel, intrigued, noted that Dex seemed somewhat sinister. The player explained that, besides exploring the ruins, he intended to take everything he found. He also planned to completely destroy the site to ensure no one could discover what he had done. Dex had damaged a tomb and obtained a sacred item. He couldn't allow others to find out about it, as it would complicate his situation immensely. Destroying everything would guarantee that the existence of the place remained an absolute secret. Despite Dex's stated intentions, the small Satan hesitated to believe his master would truly go that far. However, the decision was already made. Dex was determined to eliminate all evidence. The small angel was shocked but couldn't deny the visible delight on Dex's face as he smiled broadly, satisfied with his plans to destroy everything. After a few minutes, Dex was pleased, having disposed of all the evidence. He knew the plan would be perfect once he blocked the entrance. The small demon, still surprised, muttered to himself about how much he could still learn from human nature. At the Baroness Mikhail's mansion, she greeted the protagonist warmly. Dex asked if there were already new miners and if they were performing well. Excited, the Baroness replied that it was all thanks to him and assured him that they would work hard for at least an entire year. With enthusiasm, she asked if he had any idea how many people had signed the free slave contract. She explained that in exchange for a negligible fee for the mining pass, they had signed contracts that practically bound them to the site. Mikhail revealed that the number of miners had jumped from about 800 to an impressive 9,693 people. Moreover, she mentioned that not only was she profiting from the 30% tax on the ores, but also from the iron ores extracted. Curious, she wanted to know where Dex had gotten the idea. He answered vaguely, saying he was inspired by something, perhaps news about capitalism. Still, he thought to himself that the Baroness was even more insane than he had imagined, and each day seemed worse. Dex reflected that it would be wise to keep some distance from her, but the Baroness was fully satisfied, feeling her game had finally changed. She agreed that her wish had been fulfilled and asked about the rewards. Returning to her usual tone, Mikhail said everything was ready. She handed him a bag containing the promised gold, totaling about 10% of the additional profit, 120 gold coins and 23 silver. Dex was satisfied, as the amount was equivalent to approximately 12 million won. Even so, the Baroness tried to persuade him to stay and work alongside her, saying she would make him her greatest ally. A status window appeared, showing the Baroness's proposal. She trusted Dex completely, which made him ponder his decision. Meanwhile, in another dimension, the virtual reality called Arcadia held a secret history. Created for a single person, that vast virtual world existed because of Jack. Jack thanked Jennifer for helping him find happiness in a life where he had never known freedom. Without words to describe his emotions, he asked Jennifer to simply observe that world, made for and by him. Jack was the creator of the virtual reality Arcadia, and the administrator of this world was the artificial intelligence Alice. Approaching Alice, Jack asked how much time had passed and noticed that she seemed concerned. Alice reported that a critical incident had occurred, requiring adjustment. However, her authority was insufficient to handle the problem. Examining the screen, Jack found the emergence of the secret class Cry of Anarchy intriguing. He realized that the job had been altered to this class, something he, as the creator, was unaware of. It was clear that a disruptive element had emerged in his world, which piqued his interest even more. The idea of a disruptor arising in Jack's world made him quite excited. Additionally, he possessed the advancement item of the Sacred Prophet, the glorious Celestial Medallion. However, this item belonged to a class destined for the supposed main character of the Sacred Demonic War. It so happened that a single individual had acquired both forces, which made the creator take note of an imminent conflict. Jack, finding all of this fascinating, commented to Alice that the idea of creating Arcadia had been a very good one. For Alice, it was enough that he was satisfied, and she then asked what should be done about the player Dex. She waited for Jack's decision, who thought that Dex should work on improving the game and later receive a response. The decision was made. Since Dex possessed the item, he would be rewarded. In this case, the reward would be a modification to the item's attributes. However, the creator knew that the player was unbalanced in the world of Arcadia and would therefore need to restore balance. Thus, Jack decided to send Miguel to counteract the dark force within the player, re-establishing equilibrium in the world. Meanwhile, in the barony, Dex faced a dilemma. Should he stay with the Baroness or reject her proposal? He began by apologizing and explained that he had to decline the offer. As he had previously mentioned, he needed to continue his adventure. The Baroness was disappointed, as she had believed Dex would stay with her. However, Dex remarked that once his journey was over, he would return to that place. Deep down, he knew it would be too exhausting to get deeply involved with her. Hearing that Dex intended to return someday made the Baroness feel satisfied. Knowing this, she handed him a letter of recommendation, allowing him to travel safely anywhere. She explained that she had written the letter herself and that, with it, Dex would likely gain protection wherever he went. The status window confirmed that Dex had received the quest reward, the Baroness's letter of recommendation. Dex found it strange but thanked her for the protection. He then asked if a war was about to break out in the country. The Baroness, surprised, asked if Dex hadn't heard anything about what was happening and mentioned that for a long journey, a letter alone wouldn't suffice. Dex inquired about the state of the kingdom and what it all meant, as such a story could only be shared with an NPC. She began to explain that the recent situation of the imperial family was not good at all. After the current king aged, the prince was supposed to ascend the throne. However, he was too immature to take on the responsibility. This led to intense political strife, with factions fighting for control. The worst part was that among these factions was Duke Barian, who had become the leader of the noble faction. And not only that, but the Duke had also suggested that the country go to war with the neighboring nation. The Baroness then revealed that after these events, she wasn't sure how much the country could endure and expressed great concern about the situation. Dex, however, seemed to be more problematic than she had imagined but didn't want to get involved in any way. He then noted that the letter of recommendation written by the Baroness detailed how he had solved the barony's problem. Even the kingdom could welcome him with open arms, but she also asked him to lend his strength to the kingdom. Dex feared what had happened, but a new quest was updated. He was tasked with contributing to the kingdom and the imperial family. He realized this wasn't just a quest but a mission, and the strangest part was that he wasn't consulted about accepting it. This made Dex think the game was being unfair since it didn't give him the option to choose. Dex then said he would do his best to help. Satisfied, she remarked that she knew she could count on him and believed he would accept the mission. As he was leaving, she bid him farewell with a strong and eager wave, waiting for his return. She shouted to him to feel free to contact her at any time, as she would always be waiting. Dex, head down, felt he had made a problematic connection. The Baroness, on the other hand, felt that it wasn't something simple and was certain that even a fool would realize it after meeting him. That adventurer was the key to changing the entire world of Arcadia. His thoughts were logical and rational. Jeong's actions, the protagonist, were beginning to alter the world known as Arcadia. However, it wasn't clear whether he wanted this or if it was the flow he was destined to follow. Yet, it hardly mattered because the fates had been altered by his own circumstances. And this was an immutable and irrefutable fact, the result of the impact he left behind. Even though most of what had happened seemed meaningless, this was a world designed for the users. And who would dare punish the one who had come closest to the game's original objective? What mattered most was that the pranks Dex would carry out from that point on, compared to his previous accomplishments, would be nothing. The small Satan asked his master if he was all right, knowing that things were problematic when it came to human politics. Dex, in his reflection, realized one more thing. Even if things ended here, he would see it through to the end. This left the small black-winged angel confused, but his master explained that it was all about plausibility. The status window indicated that the issue related to the system error had been resolved. The status of the glorious celestial medallion was fully adjusted, and its intense light once again illuminated everything. It was so bright it hurt Dex's eyes, as well as those of his small black-winged angel. They didn't know why this blinding light began to condense, but it seemed to be forming a pair of angelic wings. Dex, observing, thought he could understand what it was, and unfortunately, Satan knew exactly what was happening. Annoyed upon seeing those blonde locks, he immediately recognized the situation. The status window reported that, due to the effect of the glorious celestial medallion, Dex had formed a connection. It was sacred in nature, and a guardian angel had been summoned to protect him. The connection to this angel was permanent, making it impossible to sever, as they were now interlinked. The angelic apparition was none other than the Star of Sanctity and Glory, Archangel Michael, in all his splendor. However, just as it happened with the great demon king, the archangel had been infantilized. Angels and demons were like cats and dogs. It could be said they were sworn enemies of one another. They were two races that could not coexist under the same sky. The meeting of their leaders would surely cause chaos. In reality, it was far less dramatic than expected. Dex witnessed the two figures simply bickering. The blonde-haired, blue-eyed angel with white wings commented to Satan about why he was roaming freely. From the black-winged angel's perspective, he expected his rival to be in the same condition as him. Meanwhile, Michael asked Satan if he still hadn't learned his lesson from their last fight. The protagonist merely asked both of them to stay still and wanted to know what they were doing. What was causing so much commotion and noise? Satan, his black-winged angel, said he wanted to put that chicken in its place. That's how he liked to refer to angels. However, the white-winged angel had the same intention for Satan. For emphasis, Satan mockingly added that if he at least had his original body, he could teach that pigeon a thing or two. Meanwhile, the gentle white-winged angel said everything was ridiculous and that even he, without his original body, was limited. To the protagonist, hearing about legendary and divine weapons felt more like watching two kids fight over a toy. It had nothing to do with the grand myths in the books that described the two as great powers. However, the beautiful blue-eyed angel caught his master's attention and asked why he had made a contract with Satan. The protagonist simply replied that he didn't choose it, he was forced into it. Satan retorted, saying he had enjoyed using him so far. The power the protagonist possessed was called plausibility. This power became very dangerous in the wrong hands, especially if he handed it over to any villain. The angelic being took the opportunity to call Satan just a bat, which didn't sit well with him. He countered by calling the angel a chicken. The divine angel, in turn, remarked that there was nothing to be done now, as the contract had already been sealed. He said he would become Satan's guardian angel and guide him down the righteous path. The protagonist looked at the angelic figure with doubt in his eyes, unsure if this was truly what he wanted. However, the scene caused much laughter and even a few chuckles from the small demonic being, who found the angel overly naive. In truth, Satan didn't know the human very well and understood that this mission was practically impossible for just any angel. The divine being then asked what the demon was muttering about, and Satan explained that his master was no ordinary person. His master was, in fact, the most demonic person he had ever encountered. Perhaps even worse than any other evil being. Hearing those words, the protagonist knew his small companion was right. To reach this point, he had accepted the doubled class of anarchy, which obviously involved bringing chaos. If one were to describe the essence of everything he had done so far, it would be more accurate to say his nature leaned more toward the dark side. And although he tried to fulfill the angel's wish in this situation, the angel warned him that everything had a proper way of being done, as long as one looked at things the right way. The angel believed that all humans had been created by a great creator who had placed goodness in each of their hearts. The protagonist believed that he could change. From that moment, the angel would try to awaken the goodness that still existed within him. Approaching the protagonist, the angel requested that he be called out from then on. The small demonic being merely observed the Archangel Michael's demand to be called by another name. To maintain peaceful coexistence between that being and the master, he warned that he would ignore the presence of that pigeon. He made it clear that the decision was his and that he could settle the matter in a fight if he chose to act physically. However, the angelic being simply dismissed the idea and declared that moving forward was not the way of a vile demon. The two likely began to quarrel, and now the topic had shifted to the plausibility contract. The protagonist merely watched as the two hurled insults like chicken and bat at each other. He concluded that he now had two noisy summons instead of just one. Still, he wanted to discuss a proposal with the angelic being. It didn't matter if the being was angelic or demonic. Unfortunately, the world followed the rules of capitalism. It was governed by the logic of market competition. The protagonist then said that, since they were discussing plausibility, he would inform the angel that he had given nothing for free to the small Satan, and for that reason, he had a question for the angel. Was he also willing to trade something of value for plausibility? To the protagonist, the most important thing was always receiving something in return. This wouldn't change just because the angel had white wings and was a divine being. However, Elle skillfully handled the situation and said she was well aware of those rules. She explained that she possessed some celestial weapons that could be of great help to humans. The protagonist, however, wasn't interested in items anymore, as he already had plenty. What he wanted were abilities. Noticing the angel's astonishment, he realized she didn't know much about games. Now, with this angel, he needed to explain a different concept. He said he needed something that could make a weak being strong in combat. This could be called power. The angel thought for a moment about the power the protagonist was referring to. Being charged with anarchy didn't seem sufficient for the protagonist, and it definitely appeared to be an incredible task. It was something that allowed for obtaining a mysterious power like plausibility, but it came with a significant penalty. It was the total absence of a leveling system. The protagonist knew that the abilities he had so far, like mining or diving, were useless for combat. And while it would be great to take items from the small Satan, there would be a limit. After some time thinking, the angelic being managed to recall something useful. It was a contract with an angel, granting a skill called Divine Descent. The status window revealed that he could use plausibility to temporarily borrow the power of the heavens. The angelic being explained that this completed their contract and extended her hand to the protagonist. She thought about how much power could be exchanged for plausibility. However, it seemed to be a good deal. Feeling the power coursing through his veins was incredible. The Divine Descent was a powerful skill he wanted to test as soon as possible. The power made the small demonic being uncomfortable, as it was extremely bright and attention-grabbing. It was visible from a long distance, which ended up attracting enemies closer to him. A large green monster with enormous fangs noticed the presence of the player. Meanwhile, the angelic being described the powers he could gain. One of them was the Knight of Honor, Farhan, or even the true great mage, Merlin, known to all as an excellent sorcerer. The legendary divine archer, Parcel, was also a highly significant force if he could obtain her. He could also rely on the great thief of loyalty, Murfin, who had excellent combat skills. The divine angel explained that divine descent allowed him to temporarily borrow the power of ancestral heroes, who had pledged their loyalty and offered their souls. The protagonist understood and found it very useful. However, someone suddenly appeared, speaking strangely and demanding the human hand over all his belongings. Turning around, Dex noticed the presence of a large green being with huge fangs. The protagonist was extremely pleased, as the monster had arrived at the perfect moment. He needed someone to test the powers of the divine descent he had just acquired. His luck was so great that he received the Knight of Honor, Farhan, to face the enemy before him. On Mount Fian, there was a mining field, and although some people didn't believe it, everyone was playing the game hoping to strike it rich with a big find. However, many thought they were being too naive. Soon, everyone realized their dreams would not come true and began accepting the fact that they had been deceived. The young Choi, who was also inside the mine, was now deeply regretful. He thought he would rather be with his friends. He couldn't even tell his friends he was trapped in a mining camp because of the immense shame he felt. The hopes of that player were so low that he no longer wished for money. What he truly wanted was freedom. Because of this, he started thinking about escaping, believing it was the only solution. However, as he entertained these thoughts, he heard about someone who had tried to escape and failed miserably. One of his fellow miners had been caught attempting to flee. That player no longer wanted to be a slave in the mine. Several other players around Choi noticed the unfortunate player who had tried to escape. One of them made it clear that fleeing was equivalent to deserting and breaking the contract with the Baroness. If that happened, the person would be treated as a criminal in all the villages of the city. That was the end for anyone who genuinely wanted to play the game. They had to remain in the mining camp. Choi abandoned his thoughts of escape. When asked if he was thinking of fleeing, he replied that he had never considered it. Returning to digging with his pickaxe, he struck the rocks with all his strength. Then, he achieved rank 5 mining skill. His speed increased, and he could now mine for much longer. Additionally, he earned the title of Persistent Miner. The status window revealed that the longest burning flame was showing interest in him. Choi, already tired and frustrated with the game, was surprised when he glanced at his status window. However, he had no idea what the longest burning flame was. He was constantly urged by the guards to keep going. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Dex was using the Divine Descent, the power he had obtained from the Archangel. He was enveloped in the power of the Honorable Knight Satan, a legendary sacred knight. His sword instilled fear in evil demons, and many lives had been saved by his shield. His presence was a promise of great victory, and he was known as a living honor. However, the demons, who were his enemies, called him by a different name. This was because he could shatter even the strongest shields, and the demons shouldn't have been surprised. Wherever that honorable knight passed, he brought victory, glory, and justice with him. As a result, he was granted the title Demon Crusher, another nickname by which he was known. The status window confirmed that a celestial being had descended upon the protagonist's body. Now, he could temporarily use that being's power and for a limited time, access the abilities of the honorable knight. This left both the protagonist and his favorite demon, the small black-winged angel, utterly stunned. Satan immediately recognized the sword and shield, and upon seeing them, the protagonist was quite pleased with the Divine Descent ability. The small Satan wondered why it had to be that being, the destroyer of his people. Dex asked him if he knew the honorable knight. Terrified, the small Satan responded that he did, and that every demon in hell knew the name of that monster. Dex, however, said nothing to Satan. He simply thought that this must be the knight fighting for justice. After talking with the small malicious blackwing being, Dex realized he hadn't paid enough attention to the guests. They were enormous beings standing before him, eager to fight. If that's what they wanted, Dex would gladly oblige. The monsters noticed that the player had altered his presence, and commented among themselves that he seemed different. This excited Dex, as even the monsters noticed he was more powerful. Dex realized that one of them was a boss, and displayed a certain level of intelligence. When he left the barony, he had taken a different route. He had chosen a path through the depths of the forest, a place rarely visited by anyone. This was a shortcut to his next destination, but most users never ventured near that area. The reason was the orc warriors, precisely those who were now challenging the protagonist. He knew their level was 25, which he thought was quite strong, but he also needed to realize how strong he had become. One of the orcs roared, swinging his sword toward the protagonist, unleashing a golden flame. Smiling, the protagonist, unharmed, activated the Unshakable Will skill as soon as the attack was launched. Since the orcs had used their chance to attack, it was now the player's turn. The boss was simply waiting for the assault. The player thought it would be more interesting if the fight lasted a little longer, and the Holy Shield entered combat mode. The Conviction of Justice was activated, as was the Burning Flame of Dawn. All of this was reflected in the status windows, and in the middle of the fight, Dex raised an enormous golden sword. The orcs, seeing such power, were terrified of the human and begged him not to come any closer. The protagonist was thrilled to be able to defeat all those enemies with his newfound power. Afterward, a great light spread through the forest, toppling trees and illuminating everything around. The status window notified that the Divine Descent ability had ended and was calculating the plausibility spent. A total of 352 plausibility points had been consumed, and the player was satisfied with the achievement. He imagined he was much stronger, as he managed to eliminate all those bosses with a single strike. Even the divine angel in front of him found the feat accomplished by the protagonist truly impressive. He thought it was ridiculous that, despite using the Divine Descent ability, Dex was still just a human. Suddenly, the angel's eyes widened, as if he had realized something far beyond his own existence. The archangel was grateful and reported his thanks to his creator, as he now understood why he had been sent to that place. The human was the existence that would change the course of the entire world, and he, Michael, would witness it all with his own eyes. Looking at the protagonist, he thought he would see firsthand everything that person would accomplish. When the protagonist's two summons finally lay down to rest, they were able to sleep at last. Both were immersed in their own thoughts. The power of divine descent was something that completely captivated their attention. The protagonist needed to carefully reflect on every detail. He considered that the ability was truly valuable and that, thanks to it, he had significantly improved. Analyzing the benefits, he realized that the power helped mitigate problems arising from level differences in battles. Initially, he could only buy items from the small demon, using them to reduce the power gap in combat. However, since he had already spent a lot of plausibility acquiring those items, he knew he needed to keep using them, even though they had a limit. That was precisely why he decided not to acquire any new combat items. He felt relieved to know that this specific problem had been resolved. However, there were disadvantages. The plausibility cost of divine descent was extremely high. He remembered how he managed to defeat 3 orcs in less than 3 minutes. Even considering the time spent analyzing the skill window, the entire event took less than 10 minutes. But the exorbitant plausibility consumption worried him. He pondered what would happen if he had to face an even more powerful enemy, and calculated the potential cost. There was also the issue of skill proficiency. Each new existence obtained through divine descent presented new challenges. While lost in thought, the small white-winged angel appeared, smiling mischievously and saying he found it all quite amusing. Noticing the angel's presence, Dex turned and asked why he was still awake. The angel explained that, unlike black-winged angels, those with white wings tended to sleep lightly. The small angel continued, noting that the protagonist might not know this, but sacred warriors with great power rarely needed to rest. Additionally, he mentioned that bringing such individuals to Earth wasn't as costly as it seemed. He also suggested that the protagonist consider how extraordinary plausibility was, capable of making even the most improbable situations possible. The angel's sharpness caught Dex's attention. Observing his behavior, Dex realized the angel had an incredible knack for negotiation, making him feel slightly tricked. Even so, the protagonist firmly stated that he would only use that power in absolutely essential situations. Meanwhile, in the Kingdom of Maroon, which served as the main base for the Korean server in Arcadia, internal affairs were not in great shape. Despite this, the kingdom was widely regarded as prosperous. Located at the center of Arcadia's second continent, it took advantage of its privileged geographical position. It functioned as an important business mediator between other countries, enabling substantial profits. It was inevitable that significant trade agreements would be established in the Kingdom of Maroon due to its strategic location. A merchant, visibly annoyed, had brought several goods and had been waiting for a long time. He was informed that the master merchant was unavailable at the moment. Therefore, he would need to address his matters with someone else, the branch service manager, Mr. John Smith. The manager explained that the master merchant was engaged in an important meeting. At that moment, the master was accompanied by Duke Beren, working to resolve old grievances between them. The master of the Great Association believed that the Duke could significantly contribute to the logistics of goods. Looking at the Duke, it was evident he was a man of sharp words, something impressive for someone from such a simple village. If necessary, the Duke had the ability to mobilize all the troops of the kingdom. Such was his influence and power. This was the core of the Korean server of Arcadia, a place full of intrigue, where a dangerous figure, the subject of many rumors, seemed to be aiming for the throne. However, for the Great GM Merchant Association, that person was seen as the best possible partner, someone with the potential to make them millionaires. The merchant master, while analyzing the circumstances, concluded it had been worth researching him in advance. Choi Ji-hyo, the youngest son of the president of the GM group, was thinking about rewarding the strategy team for their well-executed work. However, he was not the pride of his family. Over the years, he had abandoned several important positions, quitting each one for various reasons. Now, he knew he was facing his last chance. If he failed again, his father would not allow him to take another position in the company. The GM Group, a major mercantile corporation, had established a veritable fortress in the Kingdom of Maroon. In truth, it was a powerful South Korean corporation, currently led by Choi Ji-hyo. It was a community dedicated to playing Arcadia Online with the clear objective of amassing great wealth. Thus, at that negotiation table, power and authority converged, blending reality and virtual reality in an impressive way. Duke Beren made his purpose for being there clear. He had heard about the rapid growth of GM's merchandise and their connections with influential figures. Because of this, he wanted the organization to use all its resources to acquire a significant amount of grain. After the conversation, an agreement was reached. GM's merchandise would now hold logistical authority over supplies in the kingdom. The Duke explained that he needed to act discreetly, without drawing attention, which was why he sought an adventurer to help him. The merchant master, aware that this was a unique opportunity, did not hesitate to finalize the deal. Though satisfied with the outcome, he also saw it as a golden opportunity for his own advancement. He considered this the moment he had been waiting for, and even his employees seemed to agree on the importance of the deal. With this in mind, the merchant master planned to contact his father immediately, believing the situation required new investments. However, his employee warned him that the company had already invested 8 billion so far, making it unlikely to secure additional funds. Even so, the young entrepreneur insisted. Although called spoiled, he believed he needed more money to achieve his goals. Despite the limitations, he considered that the resources available thus far were sufficient to move forward. If he could help the Duke supply the Kingdom of Maroon with provisions, success in conquering the Kingdom of Parkle would yield great profits. With the current king already old and frail, a power shift in the Kingdom of Parkle would place the Korean servers economy in Arcadia directly under GM Group's control. This was what Choi Ji-hyo intended to prove to his father, that he was capable of managing something grand and generating immense profits. Through the game Arcadia, he wanted to demonstrate that he had the skills and determination necessary to succeed. In his mind, no one could stop him from achieving his plans. Meanwhile, in another region, Duke Bracken, a member of the imperial family and ranked third in the hierarchy, received an unexpected visit from the player Dex. Curious, the Duke asked if Dex had been sent by Baroness Mikhail, known for her stubborn and persistent demeanor. With the Baroness's letter in hand, the Count examined the seal carefully. He asked the young man if that was indeed the letter she had sent. The protagonist explained that he didn't know its content, only that he had been told delivering the letter to the Count would secure his protection. He also mentioned that the letter probably contained important information about him. However, the Count, without hesitation, tore it apart. This act left the player stunned, as he hadn't expected something so abrupt to happen. After that, the Count looked directly at the protagonist and asked if he knew why the Baroness had sent him there. With a firm gaze, the Count analyzed every reaction from the player. Dex, realizing this, understood what the Count expected and responded that he did not know the exact reason. With a slight smile, Dex added that matters like these were suited to people of higher status, not common adventurers. After this, the two remained silent for a few moments, observing the situation unfold in an unexpected way. It seemed the Count was beginning to take a liking to Dex, even letting out a few hearty laughs. Soon after, his expression grew serious, stating that the Baroness's motives were clear and evidently tied to the war. Dex kept smiling and remarked that he had never considered having any significant role or skill in something so grand. That was when the Count, always perceptive, noticed that the young man already had some knowledge about the conflict. This familiarity with the subject piqued the Count's curiosity even more. The protagonist revealed that he had heard rumors about the prince, who seemed incapable of making sensible decisions. Many nobles were conspiring alongside Duke Beren, creating an even more turbulent political environment. After reflecting for a moment, Dex stated that he had an idea and that there were two paths, one difficult solution and another simpler one. The Count expressed surprise at the possibility of an easy solution, prompting the protagonist to continue. Dex explained that, considering the Count's words about Duke Beren being the primary culprit, it was logical to think that eliminating the leader would cause the organization to collapse. Curious, the Count asked if Dex was suggesting eliminating Duke Beren. Calmly, Dex confirmed. However, the response triggered a booming laugh from the Count, who seemed to find the idea both absurd and fascinating. Between bursts of laughter, the Count commented that he was beginning to understand what the Baroness had seen in this young man. Someone truly interesting. Dex simply observed, thinking that the Count's voice was as commanding as his physical presence, marked by an imposing frame. When the laughter subsided, the Count admitted that he had also considered this possibility, but immediately vented about the difficulties involved. Duke Beren was surrounded by guards, master swordsmen, and mages, all highly skilled and on constant alert day and night. If anyone were insane enough to attempt something against the Duke and still succeed, the Count would like to meet that person personally. Pointing to himself, Dex claimed he might be capable of such a feat. Even so, the Count seemed hesitant, as if doubting whether Dex truly understood the difficulties he had outlined. In a more serious tone, the Count asked Dex not to misunderstand his skepticism. He emphasized that, considering the player's current level, it seemed unlikely he could even scratch Duke Beren's robes. Confident in himself and his powers, the protagonist asked the Count what his real concern was. Dex also wanted to know if the Count believed he couldn't accomplish the task that had been mentioned. With a slight smile, the Count remarked that it was good to be young and full of confidence, something he admired. Determined to test that confidence, the Count stood up slowly and asked Dex to follow him. He explained that, since the young man was so confident in his abilities, he should prove them in a duel. Additionally, he mentioned that Baroness Mikhail was likely impatient, but he trusted her judgment as someone who recognized potential in people. Thus, the Count decided to give a fair evaluation of the young man's abilities, as recommended by the Baroness. Before proceeding, he asked Dex not to disappoint him. After all, besides being a Count, he was a rank 3 Master Swordsman of the Imperial family. Without hesitation, Dex used the Divine Descent ability, even knowing it would consume many plausibility points. This time, he managed to summon the divine existence of the Wandering Knight Caphelis. The aura around Dex shifted dramatically, something the Count noticed immediately. In mere seconds, the young man who had previously seemed inexperienced now displayed the posture of someone who had trained with a sword for a lifetime. The status window confirmed that Caphelis had descended upon Dex, allowing him to temporarily use his powers. Confidently, Dex informed the Count that he would only need 5 minutes to finish the duel. He justified the short time due to the high plausibility cost of maintaining the ability. When the fight began, Dex activated Quick Steps and Wind Blade, charging forward with full force. The Count, initially apprehensive, quickly demonstrated that he was no ordinary combatant, showcasing his vast experience. Although Dex attacked with the intent to end the duel swiftly, the Master Swordsman skillfully regained control of the situation. As the Count was impressed by the strength of the young man's strikes, he began to realize that Dex was no ordinary adventurer. Dex, noticing the Count's surprise, sarcastically asked if he had only just realized that. The Count recalled when Dex had claimed he could take Duke Beren out of the game and, at that moment, started to believe the young man might be serious. Dex wanted to end the duel as quickly as possible to avoid consuming even more plausibility points. However, the Count seemed determined to push his limits. The Count used his special technique, Aura Blade, a signature move of the kingdom's swordsman. He commented that he was still a beginner as a master swordsman but took pride in his skills and wanted to put them to the test. Dex, on the other hand, found it unnecessary to prolong the fight. In his opinion, the Count had nothing to prove to anyone. Even so, the Count charged forward with full force, delivering a powerful attack. Dex, far from being a mere beginner, was ready. In addition to his experience as a player, he wielded the immense power granted by Divine Descent. The clash between the two continued, each strike revealing the strength and skill of both, as Dex's destiny in the kingdom unfolded before them. Dex knew exactly what needed to be done, and with so much power in his hands, he was determined to act. The Count was astonished to realize the young man could perform a maneuver similar to the formless sword, something he himself had once used. However, Dex's technique was different, and clearly belonged to a master's level. Of that, the Count had no doubt. It was only then that he understood the young man was a talented individual who had remained hidden until that moment. Meanwhile, messages began to appear in Dex's status window, for having used the formless sword ability, or a sword, which was limited to level 150 or higher. An additional amount of plausibility was deducted. Dex was not pleased with this, especially because the white-winged angel seemed increasingly demanding. The Count, watching from afar, found it odd to see the young man talking to himself but chose not to comment. Growing impatient, Dex warned the Count he would finish everything quickly. The Count knew he was serious and understood the power of that technique. When Dex advanced with full force, he demonstrated absolute strength. With a precise movement, Dex disarmed the Count, knocking his sword away. Although the strike was defensive, its power was overwhelming. The Count struggled greatly to block the attack, and in the end, the sword fell from his hands, hitting the ground with a loud clang. Satisfied, Dex felt he had proven his point. He didn't eliminate the Count simply because he chose not to. As soon as the Count's sword touched the ground, the status window notified Dex that the Divine Descent ability had ended. The Count, still on the ground, was relieved to have survived, as it was evident Dex had no intention of killing him. The status window then displayed a calculation based on the time of use of the divine forces. Dex earned the title of Miracle Warrior for having subdued a master-level opponent, along with a 10-point increase in strength. However, the ability consumed 2,800 points of plausibility, leaving Dex dissatisfied. The white-winged angel appeared, explaining that this time he had used the full potential of the ability, which justified the cost. Even so, the angel seemed impressed. He commented that such a feat would normally be impossible and asked Dex if he had trained with swords before. Dex replied that he had, but elsewhere, thinking he wasn't lying since he had won first place in sword competitions in the past. Meanwhile, the Count, still observing the young man, found it unbelievable that he had lost so completely. He, a master swordsman of the kingdom, was unable even to predict the path of Dex's sword. Convinced he was facing absolute power, the Count resolved to train even harder to try to reach that level. Still on the ground, he asked Dex about the attribute of his sword. Dex replied briefly that it was probably wind, which left the Count impressed. Wind, he thought, was the fastest, freest, and sharpest power of all. Determined to improve, the Count promised himself he would dedicate himself fully to his training. Meanwhile, the black-winged angel, waking from a long nap, asked his master why the Count insisted so much on training alone. The angel's master also had no answers to this question but knew the Count was someone determined to achieve perfection. The Count apologized for his earlier rudeness and begged forgiveness for the insolence of an old Count. The protagonist smiled and said it was all right, that such things happened. The Count then wished to continue the conversation. Regarding eliminating Duke Beren, he wanted to know if the young man was still interested. Dex explained that the best way to resolve the matter was to eliminate him, as the Duke sided with the forces of evil. There was no other alternative but to completely eliminate the Duke. Even so, the Count expressed that this was still a concerning matter. Smiling, Dex asked the Count if he knew what the Gordian knot was. The Count replied that he did not. Dex then explained that the Gordian knot was a complex knot, difficult to untie, but that there was a simple solution to it. He asked the Count if he knew what that solution would be. The Count replied that he did not, and Dex, smiling, said the solution was simply to cut it. He explained that, even if someone tried their best to untie something impossible, they would not succeed. However, if they cut it, then they could see what would happen, as everything would resolve itself naturally. The Count thought the young man was irresponsible but recognized that he was, undeniably, the only one capable of speaking so effortlessly. Among all the problems accumulated by the imperial family in the Maroon Kingdom, Dex's solution seemed to be the best. So the Count, bowing to the young man, said that if that was what he wished, they would do as suggested. He noticed that Dex's aura had something different, and realized it wasn't just his sword skills but something within him that made Dex the most formidable player in the world. At that moment, a notification appeared on the system screen, informing that Dex had taken an important step in his mission to change the kingdom. A new mission was updated, and a side quest appeared. He had to eliminate Duke Beren. The protagonist, looking out the window, noticed that the side quest appeared out of nowhere, thinking it was the system's doing. The game was becoming more and more interesting, and his black-winged angel seemed to enjoy the master's reaction. However, the white-winged angel, with blue eyes and blonde hair, believed the protagonist should think carefully before making such a decision. This sparked a discussion between the two angels, as their opinions diverged. Dex, observing the situation, realized that the white-winged angel would not oppose the elimination of the Duke but thought the protagonist should warn him beforehand. The white-winged angel argued that the warning should be given 3 days before the action to allow time for a fair fight in the Colosseum. However, the black-winged angel disagreed with the white-winged angel's position. The protagonist then told the two angels that he had not yet made a final decision about eliminating Duke Beren. This response unsettled the two angels, and it was the first time they shared the same opinion. The protagonist explained that one should always hear both sides of the story. He believed the Duke would not start a war without reasons and that there was a rationale behind it. Dex knew that, as an adventurer who was not born in the Maroon Kingdom, the struggle for power and the war in the kingdom had far deeper implications than they seemed. There was something more important than all of this: absolute profit. He explained that, in the end, his goal would always be to pursue the side that benefited him the most. He asked the angels not to complain anymore. However, the small black-winged angel still felt that the situation was not right. All promises made should be fulfilled, but Dex believed that for good profit, some commitments could be set aside. That was what it meant to be a wandering knight. At the GM Group headquarters, the circulating news was that Agen Electronics stock price had surpassed $5,000. This happened after President Lee Junhee anticipated the announcement of Arcadia's opening. The GM Group's president, Choi Soon-young, thought those Agen Electronics scoundrels were using tricks. 5 years ago, the GM Group had been an equal rival to that company, but they started losing ground after Agen gained leadership with revolutionary technology. He believed the most important thing was that the Dreamers were very dangerous. They didn't just change the market's flow, and this meant they couldn't hold down old industries like construction and automobiles. They would need to find a way to solve this. For that reason, he was informed that the executive director, Choi Ji-hyo, wanted to see him. The son entered his father's office with great enthusiasm because he thought he had good news and needed 8 billion. The father was very outraged at the amount the boy mentioned and reminded him of a previous mess he had caused. The father asked his son if he thought that much money grew on trees, and he said that if he wanted a bigger investment, he should prepare a report. However, the director already knew the president would ask for this and was prepared. The son asked his father to read the report on the table before judging him. The president looked carefully and asked the director if the material was accurate. The son, proudly, told his father he had already spoken to the true power of the Maroon Kingdom, Duke Beren. He went on to say that if things went well, they could make Arcadia, the group's grand achievement, theirs. After thinking for a while, the president decided to give 50 billion for the director and son to handle the matter. They should resolve everything with 50 billion, as there would be no more than that, and they shouldn't forget that this was the last chance. The son was satisfied. The president, looking at the report, thought the plot was about a count, a duke, and a romantic dispute. He thought Arcadia was indeed a completely different world and that games like this were only for children. At Duke Baren's estate, guards were stationed outside the duke's office for security. Coming directly from the Harmal Empire, Sir Leonio was a secret envoy from the empire. The duke got straight to the point and asked what he wanted to discuss. That man wanted to be sure he could gain something by supporting the duke. He also sought the duke's promise to hand over the Hyrule Plains after winning the war. If that were the case, they would spare no effort in supporting the duke. They were even willing to help him become the king of the Maroon Kingdom. The authority looked at the man and found it natural that they wanted the lands, given their proximity to the territories. He calculated that the chance of a trap was low and agreed to the treaty. Duke Baren expressed his happiness about having allies on his side and said he looked forward to working together, as he told Sir Leonio. The latter hoped the count would not change his mind once everything was over. With that, the gentleman left the duke's presence. In his office, Baren felt satisfied, as everything was going according to his plan. Below one person but above the entire world was the existence subordinate to only one. And that phrase was crafted solely for his own benefit. There was only one person who could remain superior to him at that moment. So, for just an annoying brat of 8 years old, it seemed like a bad joke. That country needed a real king, not a figurehead, and the king would be him, Duke Baren. While he was there reveling in happiness, someone remarked they were glad to see him. It was the merchant master of GM Goods. The duke asked why he was there. The merchant explained that he had preemptively purchased all rations that would be produced in the future by the territories the kingdom currently relied on. He also mentioned that he had bought all the grain available in the current market without causing significant issues. He pointed out that he had cut off the enemy's supply routes and reserve resources to destabilize them completely. However, the concept of buying rations in advance caught the duke's attention. The merchant explained that it was a tactic employed by adventurers. The duke found the idea interesting. It seemed that adventurers were quite useful. He mentioned that he had invested heavily in the purpose and wanted to know if the duke could ensure the enormous rights he had promised earlier. The duke thought the adventurer was being too hasty and said he was busy with other matters. He added that it would be better to discuss the situation after the war was over. The merchant master was shaken, as the duke had promised and now seemed unwilling to deliver. With malicious eyes, the duke asked if the merchant doubted him. The young man had no choice but to retreat because that was precisely what was happening. However, he had to deny his suspicions to the duke and leave, as the duke was busy. Even so, the GM director noticed that the duke was acting deceitfully. He left the office angry because that NPC had outsmarted him. Now, there was no other way. He had invested too much capital to engage in a power struggle with the duke. The merchant group was still outside the duke's office, reassessing the situation. When he noticed someone walking past him, he couldn't see their face clearly, as it was covered by a cloak. However, he wanted to know who that person was and asked them to stop. The person simply ignored him. There was nothing the young man could do but watch as the cloaked figure walked past him. He was upset for losing sight of them but noted that the clothes and hood had concealed their face. Still, he recognized that the attire was beginner's gear, like the kind low-level adventurers wore. He didn't know what the adventurer was doing at Duke Baren's mansion and needed to find out quickly, fearing that this person might have discovered something about him and could interfere with his plans with the duke. He summoned his henchmen. With just a wave of his hand, 2 of them stepped forward, ready to follow his orders. It was then that the GM group director mentioned that there was someone in the meeting room. The 2 were instructed to keep an eye on the individual and, if it turned out to be just one user, to bring them in for questioning. The young man didn't know who it was, but he wouldn't let anyone ruin his plans, especially after investing so much. In the office, he held a recommendation in hand, given by Count Bracken. The Duke, knowing how demanding the Count was with his recommendations, asked the young man what he wanted. He asked if at least his intention was to destroy honor and waste time, then why not just state the reason outright? Appearing unconcerned, the protagonist revealed that he simply wanted to eliminate Count Bracken. That response left the Duke a bit startled, and he asked if the young man had any reason for this. Dex explained that the Count believed the only way to prevent a war was by eliminating the Duke. He added that this was why the Count was planning the Duke's swift elimination. However, the Duke thought the adventurer was clever but wouldn't believe his words unless he had some proof. Acting wisely, the protagonist said that if they were talking about proof, the Duke should already have enough to remember. Hearing Dex's words, the Duke admitted he was right. The small black-winged angel appeared to question his master. The angel knew that the one who wanted to eliminate the Duke wasn't the Count but Dex himself. However, Satan, the small black-winged angel, knew his master well and understood that he was doing everything on purpose. With a mischievous look, Dex placed his index finger over his lips, signaling for his angels to remain silent. Duke Beren revealed that he hadn't expected such an attitude from the Count, as he was uncompromising when it came to justice. Dex claimed that people would do anything when they found themselves cornered. The Duke, being direct, asked what the adventurer wanted in exchange for giving him that information. He expressed that it would be better for someone wiser and more experienced to become king than an immature child. This made the Duke extremely satisfied. Dex continued by saying that a kingdom ruled by the Duke would be better. The Duke burst into laughter, finding the player extremely amusing, and wanted to know his name. The protagonist revealed his name as Dex, and the two shook hands. When the Duke said he had a good feeling about their partnership, the protagonist felt he was living up to expectations. After their conversation, Dex left the place without concern, though his angels couldn't believe how much he had lied. The small black-winged angel, always attentive, wanted to understand what his master was trying to achieve by playing both sides. He then asked his little angel if he didn't know what was happening. Dex was simply reducing his plausibility little by little, as part of a planned strategy. The war would happen regardless of what was done. The only problem was who would emerge victorious in the end. Ultimately, the only thing that mattered was ensuring the protagonist would end up in an advantageous position. Dex believed that, in this way, he would gain more plausibility since he could even emerge victorious, as had happened before. The small angel, named Satan, was surprised and asked if his master was saying that a war would benefit him. He then questioned why his master hadn't worked directly with the Duke from the beginning. Dex explained that this wouldn't work because if he followed that path, there would be no one to fight if the Duke became king. Dex knew he needed to side with the Count first, as this would create even broader possibilities. One of the angels quickly understood the logic behind his master's choice, realizing that chaos would be the result of two wars, and this would bring many benefits to him. Double wars would mean much greater productivity, something the small black-winged angel couldn't fully grasp. Satan, the small angel, seemed to think that his master was going mad with his plans. He then warned Dex that if he intended to betray someone, he shouldn't stay on the fence, and that he should focus on profit and not cling to empty promises or alliances. Satan knew very well what a demon would do in such a situation. He would only care about accumulating gains and securing his position. Dex, however, was caught off guard when the henchman of the GM director suddenly appeared, demanding to take him away. There was no other choice. The young man had to surrender to the situation. The henchman wore threatening expressions, which caused Dex slight concern, though he was curious to discover what was behind this. Already inside the GM facilities, Dex was escorted in by the two henchmen. The director welcomed the player and invited him to sit down. Dex, with a mocking tone, replied that it was an honor to be there, especially since they had even provided him with an escort. The director, with a more serious tone, said they had enough people and that the current number was necessary. However, the protagonist noticed that the character in front of him did not have a revealed identity. Both thought this was suspicious since not even the manager could see the player's name. Dex wanted to know why he had been called there. He felt uneasy and remarked that he had only wanted to check on something. He apologized if the trip had been unpleasant, sounding as though he thought it was a fancy excuse. In truth, the man wanted to know what Dex had discussed with the Duke. The player, indifferent to the director's pressure, said he didn't remember and had no reason to share. The director was so furious that the veins on his face seemed ready to burst. He told the player he didn't understand the situation he was in. Then things grew even more tense as the director revealed his true intentions. The angels began speaking to Dex. The black-winged angel wanted to know what his master was planning. That was when the protagonist began to reflect. 2 people had brought him there. However, upon entering, he noticed there were 5 more at the entrance. He believed there were at least 7 people there in total. There was this man who didn't reveal his name, but the fact that some information had been disclosed indicated something was happening. The man was very confident that the protagonist wouldn't be able to escape the place. Thus, Dex saw no other choice but to start using his divine descent. However, someone arrived and intervened. It seemed to be a butler who informed the director that he only wanted to know about the Duke. Dex thought that someone worth talking to had finally arrived. Even so, the young director continued shouting, questioning the nature of Dex's relationship with the Duke and what they had discussed. He even went so far as to threaten the player, saying he didn't want to see him with the Duke again. However, Dex didn't feel the slightest bit intimidated. The director, impatient, continued to say he would make Dex's life difficult. To de-escalate the situation, the person responsible for the young director's security arrived. This man, adjusting the master's clothing, asked him to calm down, saying he had gone too far. This individual commanded so much respect from the GM director that, after his request, the director apologized to Dex. He asked him to listen as he wanted to explain something important. Dex observed that this man was not an ordinary individual. He revealed that they were not just a normal branch, but the GM group. Hearing this, Dex's eyes widened. The man then placed a generous amount of coins on the table and explained that he had invested heavily to reach that point. The director hoped that all the investment in Duke Beren would pay off. However, he knew they couldn't divulge details about their plans. Still uneasy with the situation, the GM director asked the unidentified player what he thought. Both were uncomfortable with the circumstances. For the protagonist, it was all profit and revolved around money. Taking his bag of coins, he was satisfied. Smiling at the cash, Dex said that all he had to do was abandon the Duke's mission. After leaving the place, accompanied by his angels, Dex realized that those men also wanted a war. He was pleased to have secured some extra cash. An allowance at that point in the game was quite welcome. Additionally, he knew that for the GM group to be involved, it was obvious they were after some profit from the war. But he also knew it had nothing to do with him. The war would be beneficial for him. However, there were caveats. He really couldn't let things go smoothly for that rich young master. He hadn't liked the rude attitude the young man had shown toward the protagonist. Dex informed his angels that he had already made his decision. He would eliminate Duke Beren. Hearing this, the blonde, blue-eyed angel was satisfied, as this was exactly what he wanted. However, the black-winged angel thought the master had gone mad. The white-winged angel asked the master if he had finally decided to act honorably. That angel believed it would be good to announce the duel, as it would fulfill the promise made to the count. Dex looked into the angel's blue eyes and told him things wouldn't work that way. Upon learning that the master planned to eliminate the Duke without anyone knowing, the angel became disheartened. Deeply upset, the angel said that, in this case, he couldn't grant divine descent. The angel was disappointed because this was an evil act, and he didn't want to be involved in such an action. It was then that the small black-winged angel with white hair, named Satan, came up with a great idea. Calling his master, Satan suggested that instead of trying to get the other angel to grant divine descent, he could lend it to him. That is, of course, if the master didn't mind that the powers came from the demonic realm. This came as a surprise to the protagonist, who didn't know that his small black-winged angel also possessed such power. Satan confirmed that he could indeed transfer powers, just as the other angel did. The protagonist, interested in acquiring divine descent, didn't care which angel it came from. Then, little Satan said he would begin by lending his powers to his master in exchange for plausibility. The contract was sealed with the demonic realm, allowing Dex to borrow the powers. Apparently, Dex adapted very well to this new power, which seemed more in tune with him than the other. When the status window appeared before him, the protagonist had the opportunity to choose from a selection of characters. This delighted his eyes, finding it quite interesting to have the ability to choose in that manner. His small angel asked what he thought, whether he liked the power. Dex replied that he liked some of the available characters. The master commented that they were all good, as expected, noting that the celestial side focused more on power, while the demonic realm concentrated on efficient and utilitarian supplements. Dex had a question. He didn't understand why the angel hadn't mentioned this before. It would have been nice to know from the start. The small angel explained that it was nothing intentional. The master simply hadn't asked earlier. At first, he thought the master wanted celestial power, but the protagonist showed he didn't care at all about that. With the status window in front of him, excited, Dex felt like he was shopping. It was thrilling. He found a character that seemed very interesting. However, the small angel found it strange that, out of all the options, the master chose that one. Satan asked the reason behind the choice. The young man replied that it was because of a book he had read before. The blonde, blue-eyed angel with his white wings was certain this was about the Legion of Death. Lich Argamer, a dark mage, but an evil one, who defeated the Empire and 4 kingdoms, plunging the entire continent into fear. No life was spared. Even centuries later, his name was still mentioned by many. He was the personification of death. The player liked that power so much that he chose the dark mage as support for what he needed to do. Now inside the Duke's estate, he assessed the situation. He noticed there were 2 guards and thought this would be perfect for testing. His presence was noticed by one of the guards, who saw him on the roof. Alerting the other guard, he wasn't sure if it was a person. However, the protagonist activated Lich Argamer's divine descent, which manifested instantly. The pressure of that power was so great that the soldiers felt it from afar but didn't know why it was suddenly getting colder. The status window notified that Lich Argamer was a being of the demonic realm that had possessed the player's body. He could temporarily use this being's powers. Dex realized that the skill configurations were exactly as he had expected. The guards felt the overwhelming energy, and were certain it was some form of dark magic. And this wasn't just any magic. It was high-level dark magic, a force that would make Dex give it his all. He told his colleague not to think about capturing the individual alive, but the two debated, as the other preferred to keep them alive to learn more. However, the first guard believed that this person could take over the entire mansion if they failed. Dex exuded malice with just his smile, quickly deciding to test his powers. These 2 guards would be the perfect toys. the guard activated the Holy Shield, and Dex, from afar, noticed that the man with his massive sword was very clever. He thought the rumors about him were likely true. The Duke was indeed surrounded by the best, and that guard seemed to be some kind of paladin. The guard told the player that he was sorry but would have to act with full force, unlocking his divine power. The Blade of Judgment was activated, and the guard was ready to eliminate the intruder. However, the player was not frightened at all. Dex didn't care, as he knew their powers were incompatible. He immediately summoned the spiritual spear, determined to fight the paladin on fair terms. He noticed that the power he wielded seemed to resemble that of a necromancer, something the other guard quickly recognized. The mana flowing from that power belonged to a high-level dark mage, which left the guard stunned. Panicked, the guard could only run and shout that the situation was an emergency, but he was quickly subdued. Dex didn't want him to raise an alarm, as it would delay his actions. He knew that a necromancer became more vulnerable just before summoning the undead. Looking at the two guards already down on the ground, Dex smiled, as he now had the materials he needed. It was time to try something. The power he would use was called Rise of the Dead. The two bodies began to float, enveloped in violet energy. The status window revealed that one of the undead was a ghoul warrior of low rank, while the other was a death knight of intermediate rank. Observing his success, Dex muttered to himself that the arrogant young master of the GM group thought his plan was extraordinary. Necromancers were capable of summoning the undead without limit, as long as they infused mana into a body. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that a single necromancer could compose an immense force. This was why they were considered extremely effective during large-scale battles, or, as in this case, during an ambush. Dex felt proud, as the ambush had been well executed. The soldiers screamed, not knowing where this army of the undead had come from, and feared they would be defeated. They blamed the Parco Kingdom and shouted to each other that they needed to contain the threat as quickly as possible, or they would lose control of the situation. The more soldiers fell, the more undead Dex would bring back. They didn't know how to deal with the situation. The number of guards was low, as most were with the Duke, which Dex found unfortunate but understood. They had been abandoned. Still, it wasn't all bad for their situation. They would prove useful to the protagonist. With every moment, the situation worsened. Now, there was a massive monster with an insatiable thirst for destruction. Dex congratulated the new members of his army, and was about to assign them a special mission. He wanted them to find the one responsible for abandoning them, Duke Beren. He was giving the undead an opportunity to seek vengeance. The skeletons, now simply mindless undead, followed their leader's orders without question. With a sarcastic tone, Dex remarked that it would be wise for Duke Beren to hide well if he wanted to survive. Although he thought it was a futile attempt, he knew the Duke's mansion was now engulfed in the dense energy of the undead. Finally, the Duke was found. He woke up to the commotion and demanded to know what was happening. The few remaining soldiers shouted to the Duke that he needed to flee as quickly as possible. The Duke believed there was no place safer than his mansion. However, he was informed that a lich had appeared in his territory. Hearing this, the Duke was terrified. All that could be heard were the Duke's screams, commanding everyone to protect him. But it seemed too late. The protagonist had already located the Duke and ordered his subordinates to attack. They obeyed immediately, and the few remaining soldiers were swiftly taken down. With this, the skeletons took control of the stronghold, and the panicked Duke pleaded with them not to come closer. However, when he saw a giant skeleton, much larger than the others, fear completely consumed him. He quickly realized that the sword belonged to Lesnar, one of his subordinates. Not only him, but other soldiers were also there. These undead were knights and bodyguards, those tasked with protecting the Duke. It was then that the Duke realized that Lich Argamer had truly appeared in the mansion. He trembled, anticipating what was to come. Smiling, the protagonist announced that he had found the Duke among his skeletons and was happy to meet him. The Duke recognized the adventurer from before and asked why he was seeking him. Dex explained that he had business with the Duke and that he would have had time to meet him if he had made the request. The Duke questioned what the adventurer was doing and what he was looking for, offering him anything he desired. With a smile, Dex said he wanted only one thing, for the Duke to cease to exist. In tears, the Duke asked why the adventurer was doing all this. With a mocking tone, Dex replied that the Duke should have been more careful about whom he chose to use. He explained that he didn't care about their war, or the Duke becoming king, or any other benefit the Duke saw in it. The Duke was shocked to realize that his plans were now in the hands of this person. Dex then made it clear that the Duke should never have angered him. He even mocked the Duke, saying he could never do anything right. The Duke, trying to justify himself, said he would do whatever Dex wanted, but the protagonist gave the command. His undead should destroy everything, and the Duke, with his long-standing ambitions, finally met his end. A red window appeared, announcing that Duke Beren had been removed from the game. Additionally, 321 missions related to him were deleted, and Dex received the title Noble Slayer. The status window also informed that the side quest had been completed, and the rewards were being calculated. Dex earned 53,000 plausibility points, and he was satisfied because he knew it would turn out this way. The two angels celebrated. The black-winged angel congratulated the master on earning so many plausibility points. The white-winged angel commented that he now felt an even stronger power flowing through the master. Dex thought the two angels were good at recognizing opportunities around them. The master then asked the small black-winged angel about Lichargamer's descent. He wanted to know if there were any restrictions on the continuous use of the power. The angel explained that the power could be used as long as Dex had plausibility points. Dex liked the response, but the angel asked what he was planning to do. Dex used the raise the dead power again, intending not to make a mess. It was better to do things correctly. By using that power, he managed to bring back the Duke's body as an undead. Smiling, Dex said there were many places awaiting destruction. He then asked the young master of the GM group to wait a little longer. The Sacred Empire, known for having the Pope as its leader, was facing difficulties finding peace at night. He thought to himself how wonderful it would be if none of his sheep strayed from the path. Meanwhile, a young woman with long hair, visibly sad and shaken, entered the room. Sylvia, the saint of the Sacred Empire, had an important revelation she wanted to share. She explained that, somewhere on the continent of Arcadia, there had been a great movement of shadows. The man known as the Pope listened attentively to the report from the white-haired young woman, absorbing every word with great interest. He then asked her if she knew more details about the event, or if she had any clues that could help them discover the exact location of this evil. Any information would be invaluable. With this in mind, Sylvia delved into her memories and, after some time, reported that someone, before being eliminated, had mentioned Duke Beren. The Pope immediately recalled that the Duke was, in fact, the hidden force behind the power of the Maroon Kingdom. The saint, deeply shaken by the loss of the innocent souls who had met such a cruel fate, couldn't stop lamenting the events. The Pope tried to comfort her, saying that the saint was being used by the sacred to warn them. Nothing bad would happen, he believed. The sacred knight Eguriel was present, waiting, after being summoned by the Pope, to receive his orders. As a high-ranking sacred knight, he was ready to carry out any mission given to him without hesitation. The presence of the knight was acknowledged, and he was informed that the saint had received a celestial revelation. It was urgent to investigate what had happened to Duke Beren. The status window indicated that Beren's family was caught up in a major turmoil. Production had been reduced by 85%, and military strength by 98%. It was also reported that citizens within the Duke's territory were in great fear, with many beginning to abandon their lands. Dex's fury had reached everyone, causing absolute chaos and spreading fear throughout the region. The status window confirmed that the protagonist had subdued Duke Beren's territory and received the title Vile Micromancer. After destroying the Duke's secret plans, the protagonist gained 14,000 plausibility points. From a high vantage point, he admired the view, finding the landscape magnificent. If he had known being a necromancer was so advantageous, he would have done it much sooner. However, he reflected that, despite everything, staring at skeletons all the time wasn't exactly pleasant. The undead army, led by Lichargamer, was undoubtedly an impressive and powerful force. Still, the protagonist knew it wouldn't be wise to remain in this situation for much longer. He was still using borrowed power he could only manipulate thanks to the ability called Divine Descent. Every time he used this power, it consumed a significant amount of plausibility. Often, he spent more than he gained, making it a great risk. Thinking about this, he asked his little black-winged angel how much plausibility he had consumed so far. Without delay, the little angel calculated the total plausibility consumed and quickly presented the numbers to his master. He reported that the total plausibility consumed so far was 42,284, and in a bold tone, he called his master naive. Dex realized what the little angel had just said and didn't like it at all. He knew the angel had called him naive, and it annoyed him. The protagonist argued with the angel, stating that things were expensive and that he hadn't asked for any discounts. This caught the little angel Satan completely off guard. Never before had anyone talked about discounts with a malicious being like him. However, visibly upset, the little angel explained that the resources had been used when truly needed, so it was only fair to pay for what was consumed. Dex, ever shrewd, countered by saying that, as such a wise being, he deserved a discount or even a coupon, given the unique circumstances. The Demon King, with an imposing voice, warned that this wasn't a deal with an ordinary shopkeeper and that the situation was not as simple as it seemed. But the master, even wiser, told the little malicious angel that if he couldn't offer a good discount, he would no longer do business with him. From that moment on, he would negotiate only with the white-winged, golden-haired angel, Archangel Michael. Thus began the bargaining. The little angel, somewhat reluctantly, offered to reduce the cost to 40,000 plausibility points. Dex, with his sharp negotiating skills, countered with 35,000. The little angel lowered the price to 39,990, and Dex, unfazed, said he would pay 36,000. Feeling the pressure, the angel went further and lowered the cost to 36,500, surprising even the white-winged angel. Finally, the little malicious being admitted to his master that he could no longer reduce the price. Dex was satisfied. He had achieved the extreme discount he wanted and felt that his negotiation skills had been tested and proven victorious. The status window revealed that the negotiation time and actions taken were being recorded. The system also reported that he consumed 36,500 plausibility points, and that the negotiation had been successfully completed. He was the first human to profit from negotiating with the Demon King, earning him a unique title. His proficiency in negotiation skills increased exponentially, meaning he would now be much more efficient in interactions with NPCs. Additionally, his negotiation skill rose to rank 7, a significant achievement considering he had started at rank F. He was quite pleased, knowing this was an impressive accomplishment, especially since his target had been the little malicious angel. However, the little black-winged angel was deeply frustrated. He realized he had suffered a complete loss after that negotiation. Dex knew that, with the current state of Duke Baren's territory, it would probably be regarded as a complete mess. Determined, he instructed his 2 angels to stay behind and await his return, as he needed to leave for a while. The 2 angels, worried, wanted to know where their master was going and what they would do without him nearby. However, the master responded that he needed to finish a few things and that, once he was ready, he would share all the details. With that, he logged out of Arcadia and quickly returned to his real life. As soon as he arrived, he searched for everything related to Arcadia and the incident in Baren's territory, quickly realizing that the topic was gaining major traction. It was exactly what he had anticipated. He reflected on how everyone would react if they knew the truth, and his plan began to take shape. Now it was time. He needed to gather what was necessary and prepare to finish what he had started with the young master. The protagonist, always an MMORPG enthusiast, knew this wasn't his first time dealing with situations like this. He perfectly understood how to handle people like the GM Group's director, relying on his past experiences as a guide. That's when he found the perfect method to deal with those who crossed the line by using power for their own ends. From the moment the protagonist decided to confront the young master of the GM Group, he calmly began preparing the perfect plan. Searching through his video gallery, he knew he needed to compile the right footage and craft a compelling piece. He thought it would be a good idea to ask the angel to observe, or rather stalk, the showy young master. The protagonist was determined to make him pay for everything he had done. Every appearance of the young master would be shown and tied to an impeccable storyline. Thus, when everyone saw the video, there would be no more doubts. This man had made a deal with Duke Baren. Additionally, the video would show that he used around 80 million gold to acquire all the supplies and monopolize the profits generated by controlling the grain supply. That would only be the tip of the iceberg. What the young master of the GM Group discussed with his trusted man in a private conversation was something the protagonist wanted everyone to know. He wanted to expose everything. The video would also make it clear that all of this happened thanks to the players, who were only dedicated to the game to have fun, unaware of the manipulation behind the scenes. Finally, the protagonist made sure to emphasize at the end of the video that he hoped a major war would break out after revealing the truth. He had gathered enough to create the perfect video, without hesitation. When he finished, he released it on social media, eager to see the impact it would cause. The title he carefully chose was Revealing the Culprit Behind the Incident in Baren's Territory. He believed this title would grab everyone's attention, generating widespread interest. The video had the impact the protagonist expected, creating a significant buzz on social media. Views began to climb rapidly as the video circulated across the internet. It even reached the young GM Group director, who immediately realized his downfall was imminent. The security officer for the young director also recognized the trouble he was in. However, they couldn't figure out how the conversation they had in the room was leaked, as no players had been nearby. There was no way the conversation could have been recorded, let alone exposed like that. Furious, the director punched the computer screen, injuring his hand with the impact. He didn't know who had done it, but he was determined to find the person responsible and make them pay. However, his assistant interrupted, saying there were more urgent matters to address. At that moment, his father's phone call came through. The young director, realizing his father was calling, grew even more nervous. He knew he was in deep trouble. With the phone ringing, he froze, unsure of what to do, certain he was about to receive the scolding of a lifetime. Meanwhile, an urgent news report was being broadcast, revealing that the GM Group director was involved in the incident. The revelation was shocking. The GM Group, now seen as the culprit behind the incident, had invested a significant amount of capital to purchase gold. What truly stunned everyone was the amount invested, approximately $750,000. The CEO of Arcadia, watching the news attentively, smiled as she saw her competitors in trouble. She realized the uproar would be immense, and this would be the first time virtual reality had a major impact on real life. The director, concerned, asked the CEO if she thought the public should be allowed to know about the entire mess. Li Mayan calmly replied that she saw no problem in exposing it. For her, it was an opportunity to use the GM group as an example. She had decided to take the situation to the very end, regardless of the consequences. The director thought her decision was extreme but didn't dare to disagree. She commented that if the situation dragged on any longer, it wouldn't be him who lost, but the GM group itself. Hearing the president speak so boldly, the director realized she was truly a remarkable woman. In truth, she didn't care about what would happen to the GM group. What really mattered to her was the user responsible for the video. She knew he had been involved in the Slime Revolt and the Iron Mines slave incidents. Recently, he had also taken control of Duke Beren's territory, and his actions were creating a significant impact in the game. She noticed that the unknown user was forming a pattern, which piqued her interest. Meanwhile, the protagonist, who was extremely tired, slept slumped over his desk at the university. His classmate quickly approached, shouting and asking if he already knew what was happening. The protagonist, uninterested, simply wanted to continue studying and asked what was going on. Visibly distressed, his classmate explained that this wasn't just a game, but a massive economy capable of moving millions. The fact that the incident had become a major news story in real life showed that Arcadia was no longer just a game. The virtual world had become so real that the protagonist, upon hearing his classmate, admitted it did seem extraordinary. He reflected that, fortunately, everything was happening exactly as planned. It wasn't just Jagin's reaction that pleased him, but also the fact that others were debating the same topic. This was good for his plans. The day came when the news spread so widely that the young heir had to face reporters. The protagonist was satisfied, as he had managed to teach an important lesson. Now, the GM director had learned it as well. Meanwhile, someone arrived at the location, greeting everyone. The protagonist, not recognizing the voice, thought he had never heard anyone speak in such a way. The person introduced himself as a researcher from Arcadia's research and development team. After introducing himself, he said everyone should listen carefully to what Professor Kim had to say. The protagonist, upon hearing this, assumed the man was an Arcadia employee. Meanwhile, inside Arcadia, the little black-winged angel, bored, was dozing off. That's when he sensed an incredibly flashy power appearing out of nowhere nearby. He found the power repulsive, not knowing whose it was, but was certain it didn't belong to an ordinary person. The magnitude of the power was immense, and moreover, an entire team of soldiers accompanied it. Realizing he should get away, the little angel wondered what the pigeon might be doing at that moment. He was annoyed that everyone had shown up just when his master wasn't around. The knights sent to resolve everything used a power called Holy Light, which seemed to destroy the undead effortlessly. Many of the undead were taken down at once, and the light appeared to erase any trace of the power Dex had transferred to the skeletons. The knight, observing the fallen former companions, noticed that only their armor remained. Among the tattered fabrics, he murmured for them all to rest in peace in the heavens. To the knight, it was a dreadful sight. He felt saddened, thinking that, had he known what was happening, he could have acted sooner. However, by the time he learned, it was too late. The investigation revealed that the purified undead were above the average ranking level. Those undead already stationed at the entrance had such levels, and there was a risk of significant losses if everyone entered at once. The knight then instructed the weaker soldiers to report everything to the Pope as quickly as possible. The light, which seemed powerful enough to leave a mark in history, had emerged. Back in the school environment, the special lecture was about to begin in Lecture Hall 2. The researcher from Arcadia's research and development team was responsible for the presentation. He explained that direct communication between the brain and machine was the core of virtual reality technology. He also mentioned that talent in virtual reality matters existed to such a degree that it could be measured. This information caught the protagonist's attention, as he studied everything with focus and curiosity. The speaker continued, stating that the speed at which the brain and machine received and sent signals would be measured. He added that the experience would be accelerated to observe if synchronization was optimal. That's when someone raised their hand, volunteering to be the first to try. That person was Hang Taisu. The students began whispering among themselves that the proposal seemed interesting, with some curious to see how the experience would unfold. The protagonist noticed that the classmate beside him seemed different, and wanted to know what had happened. He then discovered that the boy who had raised his hand was in the same class as Jagin in high school, though he couldn't remember his name. Little did the protagonist know that this boy was the leader of Group A, and the girl with him was his classmate's crush. However, they preferred to stay in their corner, thinking the situation was neither good nor bad for them. As this person passed by, he introduced himself as Kang Taisu. He looked at the protagonist and said he was looking forward to attending class with him. Then, he called his classmate Squirrel and went straight to join the lecturer. The protagonist watched thoughtfully, trying to figure out who that boy was. The lecturer explained that the capsule measured the rhythm and synchronization between the brain and the machine. He assured everyone that the capsule was extremely safe. The boy inside the capsule thought to himself that he should have been informed about this earlier. With everything ready, the lecturer announced that the demonstration would begin with the young man. Meanwhile, the student inside the capsule thought his results would be outstanding because he considered himself exceptional. He wanted to use this excellent performance to show his rival, the hooded guy with him, that he was better. He didn't like the protagonist's eyes, which seemed uninterested in anything but himself. He thought he could use this opportunity to completely crush him. His results finally came in, 21.35%. The lecturer was surprised and found the numbers quite high, comparing them to the record of 26%. This left the boy very pleased, as he believed he had achieved his goal. The researcher said it was the perfect moment and asked if anyone else would like to try. The boy who had just left the capsule pointed to the protagonist, saying he should go next. The protagonist thought it might be interesting, as it would allow him to show who was truly the best. His friend beside him apologized, saying it was all his fault because of a rivalry with that boy. The protagonist stood up, looked the boy in the eyes, and simply walked past him, heading straight to the capsule, saying they could start the measurement. He lay down in the capsule calmly, not thinking much about the results because he knew he was truly exceptional. When the rhythm reached 55%, everyone was astonished, as the result was remarkable. But the numbers didn't stop there. The synchronization kept increasing, leaving the lecturers completely stunned. The lead lecturer couldn't believe the numbers and thought there might be an error with the capsule. The protagonist reached an astonishing 92.89%. The evaluation was completed, and no one could believe it. The previous boy, who thought his performance was good enough to silence everyone, realized his numbers were insignificant. Several people started asking the protagonist if he had ever considered playing something, to which he replied that he hadn't thought about it. A barrage of questions followed, with people suggesting it would be great if he played some type of game. After leaving, it was mealtime, and he was eating something that made him feel satisfied. His satisfaction grew as he saw the young GM group director once again apologizing to several people that day. Because of this, the protagonist was very happy. The day seemed perfect, especially after the video about the incident spread widely. The video's views increased significantly, not only in Korea but also in other countries. Players of Arcadia were already discussing what had happened in the Duchy of Bren. The protagonist's videos circulated widely, bringing him good monetization. Now he was even more satisfied. The profits were lower than he had expected, but he thought internet staff were probably paid with candy. Even so, he wouldn't have to worry so much about rent or the capsule debt. He also thought that if he could exchange plausibility points for money, it would be even better. The protagonist felt this might be the last time he ate gimbap as a university student. While he was there, his classmate arrived, amazed by his score. He shared that his own score had barely reached 15%. Everyone was talking about the protagonist, even the professors. All Dex did was offer some of his food to his classmate, who said he was already satisfied. The classmate continued, saying that everyone had a good impression of him and thought the protagonist was incredible in many ways. He was very curious to see what would happen if someone like him played games like Arcadia. The protagonist revealed that he already played Arcadia, catching his classmate completely off guard. He thought that maybe it was because everything was going according to plan that day. The people who tried to humiliate him ended up getting what they deserved. Besides that, the food was delicious. Or perhaps it was just because the weather was nice and the sky was beautiful. Whatever the reason, known or unknown, that was the first time he told anyone that he had been playing Arcadia since the beta version. He also revealed that his username was Dex, and it felt good to share who he really was. Whatever the unknown reason, it was the first time the protagonist had shared details about the game with someone. He revealed his username and identity, which shocked his classmate deeply. Jaegin could hardly believe it, especially considering the name the protagonist had chosen, Dex. That name was incredibly famous. Jaegin thought it couldn't possibly be the same Dex everyone was talking about. He assumed the protagonist had chosen the name because he was a fan of the famous player. After all, if it were the case, Dex was ranked first in several games across all genres. Even though it seemed impossible, Jaegin decided to ask, "Are you a fan of that Dex?" The protagonist revealed that he was, in fact, the real Dex, but he couldn't prove it because he had deleted his accounts. When Jaegin recalled Dex's synchronization percentage, he realized it truly was him. Jaegin fell to his knees, hitting the ground repeatedly, begging for an autograph, as he was a huge fan of Dex. This made the protagonist quite uneasy with his friend's behavior. He spent a good amount of time trying to calm him down. Meanwhile, in Arcadia, specifically in the Cold Heart Valley, where the recommended level was 85 or higher, a team of combatants was facing giant monsters, attempting to group them for better results. They began to worry because the commander who had requested they pull the monsters hadn't arrived yet. After some time, she finally arrived using the power, Shadow Bind, which was enough to deal with all the monsters quickly. The combatants were thrilled, thinking the mage class was truly incredible. That dark mage was, in fact, the #1 player in the game, at level 96. Her in-game name was Shadow Dragon of Black Flames. After eliminating all the monsters, she thanked the combatants for gathering the monsters for her. For the combatants, it was an honor to fight alongside someone with such a high ranking. She was pleased with their help and asked if they could gather more monsters for her. One of the knights, curious, asked if she could use the ability again, as she had just used it a moment ago. She explained that the ability had a cooldown, but once it was ready again, she could use it. The knight realized that the ability had great range, caused high damage, and had a relatively short cooldown. It was truly impressive. Now he understood why they said having a dark mage on the team could significantly increase their power level. They began gathering more monsters, and she, in turn, defeated them all with great skill. After everything, the knights thanked her for the opportunity to fight alongside her. They said their goodbyes, expressing satisfaction and a willingness to help her again in the future. She also said her goodbyes, satisfied with the outcome but feeling tired and a bit bored. She then decided to check the status window to see if there was anything interesting happening. The window showed that a sinister rumor was spreading through the Maroon Kingdom, mentioning an imposing figure. It said this figure had been defeated by the hands of a lean, evil dark mage, and her mission was to confirm the rumor. The identity of the mage was a mystery, and the reward for uncovering the truth was unknown. She thought Duke Beren was a messy individual. Although he was intriguing, the identity of the person behind everything was something even the Arcadia community didn't know. She thought it would be difficult to uncover this alone but found it interesting to think about who could be behind all the chaos. She also believed it wasn't the work of just one user and thought it unlikely something like this could happen single-handedly. Then another window appeared for her. Act 1 of the Forgotten Darkness had been triggered. The requirements for a related mission had been met, and she now had a witch hunt mission to complete. She had been summoned to fulfill this related mission, which left her astonished. In Beren's duchy, the black-winged angel was pleased because his master had returned. The white-winged angel was also happy, as he had waited a long time for his return. The angel Satan told his master that he had indeed been wrong to use Lichargamer's power. With that, the other angel thought the bat was right but also believed that Dex was now on Heaven's blacklist. The small black-winged angel never missed the opportunity to call the other angel names like chicken, pigeon, or something similar. However, the white-winged angel didn't back down and challenged the black-winged angel to a new fight. But it was quickly pointed out that the score was 1-0, and the one losing was Satan. All Dex could do was watch the two engaging in what seemed like a childish battle. Yet, he thought that, based on how they behaved, everything appeared to be going as expected. Using his powers again, Dex wanted the story to have a great villain and chose Lichargamer as that figure. He was eager to see the strong reactions from the noble heroes when they realized that chaos was still unfolding. The soldier who had been sent to organize the situation reported everything to his superiors. He explained that after a detailed investigation in the Duchy of Beren, it was clear that Lichargamer was responsible. This left Saint Sylvia horrified, so much so that she covered her mouth with her hand to hide her emotion and shock. The authorities listened attentively to the reports because the saint was right. The being of darkness was loose. The Pope was furious, realizing they had been kept out of the continent's political matters. But in the end, malevolent forces had once again brought chaos to the world. The celestial sword Igudiel was appointed as Heaven's spokesperson and accepted this role with great responsibility. With the authority he held as the Pope of the Holy Empire, he commanded the celestial sword to judge and eliminate all evil from the earth. Furthermore, he instructed that this truth be conveyed to the entire empire. The celestial sword Igudiel reflected that everything was beginning anew, the war between good and evil. The status window opened, and a new related mission appeared. She had to choose a side, either the holy side or the dark side. Both sides offered rewards, but if she chose the holy side, the rewards were visible. The dark side, on the other hand, promised surprises. She stood still for a long time in front of the status window, pondering which choice to make. Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.